In 1999, I moved back to Washington State after traveling around the country for 4 years. My grandmother let me move in with her for a while so that I could get back on my feet. I hated the basement of her house. Always have. But it was free rent and she was cool with Chuck, my 90-pound black lab. Plus, my Gramps and I got along pretty well. Late one night, about 3 months into me staying there, I woke up because Chuck kept moving around on the bed and was shaking the mattress. Then I heard him start grumping. You know, those grumpy groans that old dogs make when you scratch behind their ears and they love it. He started doing that. Once I realized what I was hearing, I sat up to yell at him to go back to sleep. That's when I discovered the reason that he was moving around so much. He was trying to get closer to the woman who was standing right next to my bed, scratching him behind the ear. I didn't scream, and I'm proud of that. But also, what the actual hell? Where did she come from? Who was she? Why was she standing in my room petting my dog at 3 a.m.? I was too afraid to ask. I did the only thing I knew how to in those situations. I hid under the blanket. Certainly she would be gone by the time I re-emerged from underneath it. That's how these things are supposed to work, right? I waited for a little while, but when I came out from under the blanket, she was still there. So I hid under there again, 3 more times. Every time I came back out, she would still be there, smiling at me and scratching my dog's ears. The last time I was under the covers, I realized that I wasn't actually afraid of the woman. Chuck and I met under stressful situations for both of us, and because of that, he and I had a super strong bond. I trusted him implicitly. If she had meant me harm, he would have reacted to her negatively. But his reaction was clearly positive, so I figured that she probably wasn't there to kill me. So I came out from under the blanket one last time, intending to deal with the freaky woman still standing right next to me. Somehow I had decided that by turning on the light, it would make her disappear. I reached over and snapped on the bedside lamp. I don't know why I thought that that would work. Is that even a thing? Are ghosts supposed to disappear in the light? Well, I turned it on and she didn't, so I don't think it's a real thing. By then, she had been standing at my bedside petting Chuck for several minutes, and I was out of ghost-busting options, so I gave up on being terrified and just looked at her. Really looked at her. I can still see her right now in my mind, dressed up in a classy brown pantsuit with a cream-colored blouse. She had shoulder-length auburn hair styled beautifully with these big, loopy curls. She looked like she had been on her way to work a party, and she had only stopped for a second to say hello. She was very pretty. She looked happy. I didn't have the nerve to talk to her, or at least I don't remember speaking. But I stayed present, and we both looked at each other for quite a while. I remember having the distinct impression of her knowing that I was there, of both of us being aware of the other. Then she stopped petting Chuck and walked to the end of my bed, stood up straight and proud, and dissolved away. I mean that very literally. First her clothes, then her skin, her organs, and her bones. Like that Nazi at the end of Indiana Jones and the Raiders of the Lost Ark. I remember what her blood looked like as it dissolved to reveal her skeleton. That should be a gross and terrifying memory, but I don't recall it like that. At the time, it felt like she was doing it on purpose. Like she had wanted to make the most dramatic exit that she could manage. I remember thinking, this should scare the pants off of me, but also, wow. Somehow, I did go back to sleep. In the morning, over coffee, I was going to tell my grandmother about what had happened, but she had just received an upsetting phone call. Apparently, her best friend from high school, Ursula, had passed away in the middle of the night. I'd heard stories about their teenage shenanigans, especially the one about the stolen birthday cake. But I never saw a picture of Ursula, so I asked what she looked like. I couldn't tell you what she looked like these days, but when she was young, she had the most beautiful curly auburn hair, is what my grandmother said. That's not the only weird thing that happened in my grandmother's basement, but it does remain the most vivid, without a doubt. My late mother told me her ghost stories from a time when she worked as a charge nurse at a well-known hospital in my state. Please forgive me if the story is hard to follow, as she told me this when I was a kid. In the early 90s, my mother was fresh out of medical school and was fortunate enough to find a job at a prestigious hospital. The only downside of taking this job was the fact that she would be working the graveyard shift. A typical hospital night shift is 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. A couple of months into the job, she found out that one of her good friends from medical school had gotten a job at the same hospital as her. Unfortunately for my mother, her friend had gotten a day shift. On this particular day, my mother's friend ran into some car trouble and couldn't get a ride home. My mom, being the helpful person that she was, told her friend that she could pick her up and take her home before her shift started. My mom picked her friend up and took her home. Her friend was thankful for my mother and insisted that she stay and eat some dinner. My mother couldn't turn down the offer as she had rushed out of the house to go and pick up her friend in the first place. My mom and her friend sat at the dining room table eating dinner. In front of the table in the family room was a large fish tank. Looking at the tank, my mother noticed that all of the fish were pressed up against one side of it. She wasn't really bothered by this, but asked her friend, "Did you forget to feed your fish today?" "Why?" "All your fish are out and pressed against one side of the tank." My mother's friend looked at the tank and laughed. "Maybe it's my uncle. The fish would do that when he would look through one end of the glass." "I thought you mentioned to me that your uncle had passed away when you were in medical school?" "Yeah, sometimes I think he's just standing there looking at the fish, or maybe I'm losing it." They both laughed it off and finished dinner. My mother thanked her friend for dinner and left to make it to work on time. My mother was less than a mile away from work when she saw blue lights in her rearview mirror. She thought to herself, was I speeding? Did I forget to signal? Did I accidentally run a stop sign? All of this ran through her mind as she pulled over. The police officer came out to the car and up to the driver's side window. He shined the flashlight in my mother's eyes and asked for her license and registration. And then, the usual, "Do you know why I pulled you over tonight?" "No, sir." "Well, the person in the passenger seat is jumping around and clearly isn't wearing a seatbelt." "How can that be?" My mom confusingly looked over to the passenger seat, and of course, the seat was empty. The officer shined his flashlight into the car and froze. My mom turned to look at the officer, who was visibly shaken and pale. After a few seconds, the officer began to mutter, "No, not today," and slowly paced back to his car. In a flash, the officer took off. Must be Uncle, she thought. My mom arrived at work and started with her normal routine. The night shift didn't faze her until around 12 a.m. While finishing some patient paperwork, out of the corner of her eye, she spotted someone walking around in a patient gown. Concerned, she nudged one of her coworkers to check on the patient who was wandering around in the hall. He got up, looked down the hall, and immediately turned around back towards my mother. There was no one there. Confused, she looked over the desk, and indeed, there was no one there except other nurses and doctors. At around 2 a.m., my mom had gotten tired and decided it was time to get some coffee. She got up from her desk and began walking to the break room. On her way to the break room, she spotted the same patient wandering around the hall. Not wanting to disturb the other patients and nurses, she decided to follow this patient. She followed them until they turned and walked into one of the rooms. She walked up to the room and looked in, expecting to find them. Instead, she walked into an empty cardiology room. My mother walked out and began to think that she was losing her mind. Before exiting the room, she looked at the room number and saw that it read 616. She wrote it down on a notepad and continued with her shift. When her shift ended, she began to put away her work in her locker and pulled out her notepad. She looked at it, and it read Cardiology 616. Remembering what had happened, she used the break room phone and called her friend. Half asleep, her friend answered. My mom began to explain what had happened to her and mentioned her experience with the police officer and her shift at the hospital. Finally, my mom asked, "How did your uncle pass away, if you don't mind me asking?" "Oh, he was having some heart problems and passed away from a stroke." "When you visited him in the hospital, can you recall what room he was in?" I think it was room 616. "I think it was your uncle I saw last night and this morning." "No kidding." My mom always told me that story, and she truly believed that she had seen her friend's uncle's ghost. Though the ghost said nothing to my mother, she could only ponder the reason why. When I was in middle school and high school, my buddies and I were obsessed with studying the paranormal. I had every book on ghost lore that there was, and I had read them cover to cover. We would build websites with our favorite stories and local folk legends. We eventually began doing films and video expeditions at night to houses, cemeteries, caves, etc. in the surrounding area. This is just a short collection of a few of the more eerie and fun things that happened. It started off with my dad driving us out to these places at night. We would tramp off into a field or cemetery while he stayed in the car and smoked a cigarette. I remember one night we walked up a hill into a graveyard and immediately heard howling coming from the area to our right. 2 of the 4 of us freaked out and immediately headed back to the car. My buddy and I recognized it as a pack of coyotes and decided that they were more afraid of us than we were of them. There was still something that caught his eye, and from our left, behind us at this point as we were distracted by the coyotes. He tore out before I had a chance to see what it was, and I was too slow to realize that I was standing alone in the middle of a graveyard in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere. When I turned around to see what the commotion was, I saw something that wasn't terrifying so much as befuddling. I heard the quick scamper of something relatively heavy running through the forest on the edge of the graveyard roughly 20 feet away. I shined my flashlight on it thinking that it was a deer, and I could see instantly that it was not. It was nothing. Not nothing as in there was nothing there. Nothing as in I could clearly see it kicking up leaves and hear the noise and even feel the vibration as it ran. But it was as if someone invisible were running through the forest not 5 yards away from me. I turned around and walked back to the car at that point, and haven't been back since. Later, when I got my license, I would drive us out on our own. One of our first treks was to the big house on my 16th birthday. We had to walk through about a mile of cow pasture to get there, but it was worth it. This was a classic haunted house with twisted stairways and decrepit fireplaces and a spooky attic. We had entirely too many people with us at that point, so it eventually devolved into me telling my best scary stories to guys laughing nervously and girls shrieking. We left after maybe an hour of exploring with nothing but some pictures of orbs and stuff to take back. My buddy the ghost hunter and I hung back when everyone else had left, walking a few yards behind. I suddenly got the feeling that we had left someone and did a quick head count of those in front. nobody was missing. I looked behind at the house on top of the hill and saw a candlelight flitting from window to window in the attic. We sped our steps up a bit and caught up to the group without looking back again. To get to the big house, you have to go through a cemetery where a moderately famous Confederate officer was buried by the name of Champ Ferguson. My buddy and I decided to go back to this cemetery due to the violent nature of his death. He was hanged for treason in Nashville, and do some looking around. We took our flashlights and our camcorder. You have to park at the bottom of a small hill and climb some stairs to get into the small cemetery, and we made our way back into the very back where the officer's tomb was. I had my night vision on in my camcorder, and the screen flipped out, so I was using that to guide me through the otherwise completely dark graveyard. My friend had a flashlight that he was using, and I had mine in my pocket. We always checked the batteries to make sure that everything was working well before we left on these excursions. As I knelt down beside the headstone and was reading, the light from my friend's flashlight went out. I asked him to point it back in my direction to illuminate the faded text, and he said that he couldn't. It had died. I gave him mine, and he tried it, to no avail. Suddenly, the camcorder went out as well. We were in the middle of the dark with no one around for miles. We did relatively well staying calm. We had to grope our way around the tombs to get back to the road, all the while with the intense feeling of being watched from multiple sides. I almost broke my ankle when I got back to the small retainer wall and forgot about the steps in my hurry to get back into the safety of the car. A year or so ago, when I was 19, I was home alone and my dogs were in the backyard. I was on spring break. My younger brother was at his high school. Both of my parents and my uncle that lives with us were working. It was like early afternoon, 12 p.m. when I woke up and went to make my breakfast and stuff. I was watching a YouTube video while eating my scrambled eggs. I don't remember what the video I was watching was about, but I finished eating and went to sit on the couch for like 10 minutes, and then I had the sudden urge to go to the bathroom. I stood up and took my phone with me and started watching another video, closed the door, started doing my business, and at the same time my phone was at max volume. Then, all of a sudden, clear as day, I heard a woman hum outside the door. It sounded like a lullaby. Once again, clear as day, I heard it. It lasted for like 5 to 7 seconds, and I was dumbfounded. I always believed in spirits, ghosts, etc., but I thought logically at first that it could have been the video I was watching. So I rewound it to make sure. But no, that hum did not come from my video. Then I thought it must have been my mom coming home from work early because she does that sometimes. So I called out to her. I stood up, didn't even finish doing my business, opened the door and called out again to my mom, with no answer. I sat back down. I replayed the video a couple more times and once again made sure that that sound did not come from any video or any noise on my phone. So I finished up, flushed, left the bathroom, and looked around the house, checking to see if my mom had arrived and just didn't hear me calling. But she wasn't home. I checked on my 3 dogs, and they were just laying there like nothing had happened. Then I called my mom on the phone and told her what had occurred. She also believes in spirits and said not to worry. I told my brother, and all he said was, "Bruh." Then I told my dad, who is also a believer of spirits, but he takes a more logical view. Like, he makes sure that nothing natural could have caused it, before telling me if the spirit comes back to tell them to go away and ask for the lottery number. I don't remember when this occurred, but I'm pretty sure I was still 19 when it happened. But one night, I was going to bed. Me and my brother share a room. He's been asleep for a while, and I think it was around 1 a.m. You know, that stage when you're about to fall into deep sleep, but you're still aware of your surroundings. Like you can hear things as if you were awake. So right before I fell into that deep sleep, once again clear as day, I heard the same woman's voice. It wasn't my mother's voice, but this time I heard the voice right next to my ear. It was whispering something to me, but I don't recall what it said. But it was perfectly clear, and it was right next to my ear. I instantly woke up and opened my eyes, but there was no one there. I stayed awake probably for another 30 minutes under my sheets before falling back to sleep. I told my brother and my parents the next day of what I had heard, and my mom said that she would see what she could do. Legit, that was the last time that I heard the spirit. So to this day, I'm trying to remember what the spirit whispered. But I just don't know. I don't know if I had sleep paralysis, but this happened almost a year ago. I was sleeping, and then all of a sudden I heard loud bangs. I don't know if it was gunshots or fireworks. I just know it caught me off guard. And then all of a sudden I felt something hit my spine. I couldn't move my legs or arms. I was sleeping on my right side facing my wall next to the window. I kept my eyes closed and I tried moving, fighting whatever was holding me down. Tried kicking. I didn't yell even though I was about to scream so that my parents could come. But then I started to feel my legs again and kept kicking until I had full control back. I kept my eyes closed and fell asleep. I woke up in the morning, wanting to check and make sure that I didn't catch a bullet. But that only happened to me once. This may have been a huge coincidence, but last January I applied for my grandfather's military service records. He died in 1981, way before I was born. I applied for his records and didn't think anything more of it. Several months went by, and I assumed that things were just moving slowly. 6 months later, without hearing any news of his records arriving, one night I had a very vivid dream. I don't often remember my dreams anymore. In my dream, I was in a very white, very bare room with high walls and a high ceiling. On a small table in front of me was a box, and inside was my grandfather's military service history. The dream simply revolved around my taking a good look through them. Nothing too exciting. The next morning I wake up and remember the dream, maybe around an hour after I got up. 10 minutes later, a large envelope drops through my letterbox. It was my grandfather's service records. Odd? Just coincidence? A second, much stranger event occurred on the evening when my grandmother passed away. She had passed in the early morning and had been taken to the Chapel of Rest, which was not too far from the apartment where I was living. That evening, my parents invited me and my girlfriend for a dinner to celebrate her life. In the car, as we drove past the chapel, a leaf landed on the windscreen. The leaf was a perfect heart shape, upside down, so that the light from the streets illuminated the perfectness of the heart shape onto the car's dashboard. The leaf stayed on the windscreen for a minute or so, and right as we turned away and out of our town, it blew off and back toward the chapel itself. I do have a video of the leaf and the heart on the windshield. For a while afterward, shuffling footsteps and noises kept occurring in my parents' house, and they sounded exactly how my grandmother used to walk. We all heard them moving across the upstairs landing. After around 2 weeks, it stopped, and has never happened since. Odd, strangely comforting, and food for thought for a semi-skeptic who finds the subject of the paranormal fascinating. I work in a pharmacy that's located inside a nursing home, and I've been working there for the past 4 years. Just a note to mention, I've had many prior paranormal experiences in my life, but this is still ongoing. I've always felt a presence since the first week that I started, but it was never anything that made me feel threatened. Things didn't really start happening until last year, when I was talking to my coworkers about feeling a presence, and asking if that was something that they had experienced as well. The day after I had a conversation with my coworker, I was working a night shift. On our night shifts, there's only one technician and a pharmacist. I was sitting at the back counter on my computer when I thought that I had seen someone come through the door. We're usually not busy at night, but there is the odd time when one of the nurses will come down for a bag of chips or a pop. I got up from where I was seated and walked over to where our cash register was, and from there you can see the pop coolers and the chip racks. I couldn't see anyone, so I left and walked back and forth, looking down the aisles. Nobody was there. I asked my coworker if he had seen anyone come in, and he said no. But I was 99.9% sure that someone had walked through that door. I didn't think much of it. It was late, and I decided that I was probably just tired. I sat back down in my chair and started filling prescriptions. About 25 minutes later, I looked up and saw a pack of toilet paper slowly moving forward to the edge of the shelf before it dropped on the ground, startling me. There's absolutely no way that it could have just been our air system or a draft that had knocked it off. My coworker saw this too, and also thought it was odd. I told him it was a spirit that moved it, and he looked at me like I had 5 heads. So, to prove my point, I brought up the security camera footage. On the video, you can see 2 bright and fairly large orbs moving around as the toilet paper was being moved. I showed it to him, and there was no denying that it was a spirit trying to make itself known. That was my first significant paranormal experience at the pharmacy. We've had things go missing only to find them in the strangest places. For example, my car keys went missing one day from my locker, only for me to find them in with the prescription vials. My coworkers all swore up and down that nobody had hidden them there, and I most definitely didn't. Things are always falling off of the shelves, and sometimes they're heavy items, not just something light like the toilet paper incident. We had a 5-kilogram jug of Epsom salts crash onto the ground and break open, and no one was even remotely close to the aisle. Many of my coworkers and I see what looks like someone walking by out of the corner of our eye, only to realize that no customers are in the store. We also hear what sounds like the door to the front entrance open and close, and nobody is coming in. This happens multiple times a day, sometimes. The only time I've ever felt threatened or scared so far was when I was working the night shift and got locked in the bathroom. It could well have been a hardware malfunction, but I don't believe that it was. The handle locked from the inside, and I don't normally lock it anyways. I did my business, flushed the toilet, and washed my hands. I went to exit the seemingly unlocked door and felt that it was being held shut from the other side. I figured it was just my coworker messing with me, so I started yelling his name, and that it wasn't very funny, and to let me out. The handle started moving as if someone was on the other side, wiggling it. I yelled again for my coworker, and he must have finally heard me because I could hear his footsteps. He asked what was wrong, and then pulled the door open with ease. He's now finally starting to believe that I wasn't crazy, and that this place actually has some paranormal activity going on. This isn't a scary story per se, it's more eerie and odd. Just a disclaimer in case you're expecting otherwise. I met David 18 years ago when I was just 14. He was an idol for me when I first met him. He did so many fascinating things. He was a special effects artist on several television shows that were filmed in Miami, Chicago, and New Orleans. He was a sword/bladesmith, and he would render 3D images to help work on historically accurate swords for museums when the original couldn't be displayed due to research. He was amazing, and through all the years, he never lost his shine. When I was young, I wanted to be just like him. He told me very early on that he hated his name, and went by Monkey. This made me laugh so hard, as he imitated a monkey as he told me his name preference. To his best friends, Heather, Keenan, Pixie, and myself, he wasn't just a person. He was a shining star. Skipping forward many years to 2015, I bought a house in New Orleans. I hadn't quite lost track of him, but I was in my own world because of a death in the family. In late 2016, we reconnected at a club outside of Chicago, and I invited him out to visit me in New Orleans. In spring of 2017, he took me up on that, and he flew down, and it was like no time had passed. He was still the same exact shining star that I remembered. Still the goofy monkey that I remembered. In 2018, I went back to Chicago to help with family, and he stayed in New Orleans. In 2019, I was touring with a band, and we had a stop in New Orleans, and I had found out that our friend Carter had passed away. It hit us both very hard, as Carter was in his early 30s just like me, but we were able to console each other. That was the last time that I saw Monkey, at a funeral. I had brought him a necklace that Carter had made, but I never got the chance to give it to him. We kept in contact over the phone after that, as I needed to get back to Chicago and he chose to stay in New Orleans. 2020, COVID started, and made it impossible to visit for a while, but that brings me to now. November 2nd for me, as I'm currently in the UK, but it was November 1st over there, with the time difference and all. I was woken up by a mutual friend ringing my phone off the hook at 5 a.m. UK time. I answered it, and they didn't give me much info, just that he was in an ambulance and that they needed to get in contact with his parents. Enter Heather again. I called her immediately, and she got everyone in contact. As I was starting to fall asleep again, she called me and let me know that he hadn't made it. I don't remember how I took it over the phone. I think I was just in shock and disbelief. Later that day, I went looking for his social media, and it was all gone. None of us could find it. At some point that evening, I went scrolling through Instagram as one does. One of his deleted profiles popped up, and I clicked on it. How it reactivated after his passing, I have no clue. Immediately, I was drawn to a photo of him, so I clicked on that. The caption was, "Very alive and very well. I hope the same for you." And I know that he was trying to reassure me by leading me to that photo. The photo itself was from 2018, but I had never seen it before. I don't believe in coincidence, so I am damn certain that this was his way of saying goodbye and telling me that he was okay, wherever he is. It still makes me cry, and it will for a while, but I appreciate the message from him. The profile disappeared again the very next day. It might seem mundane to some, but I could almost feel him in the room trying to comfort me. Rest in peace, David Mad Monkey. Those of us still on Earth miss you. When I was younger and inexperienced, I decided to go to a spot in my small town that is supposed to be haunted. The story goes back to the 60s, when a man and a woman with 2 children got into a major argument, and she decided to leave with her kids. She packed up and left with her son and daughter, and began to head over a small bridge just south of town, when she noticed that the husband was coming after her in his vehicle. Outraged, he ran her off the bridge and killed her and the 2 children. She now wanders the bed of what used to be a river, looking for her kids. So my buddy and I were investigating there, and we didn't hear anything, so we decided to go to the other side of the river. We were using EVP only at that time. The few hours we stayed there, we didn't pick up anything. We went home, transferred the sound to a computer, and plugged the computer into our television, and then we heard a few sounds. One was at a time in the investigation when my buddy had tripped over a stick poking out of the ground, and you could hear a little girl giggling. The second was when we decided to move to the other side of the river and announced to the ghosts present that we were moving, and we heard the most eerie, slow-speaking voice of the little girl that said, "Please don't leave me." We were never touched or harmed in any way, but after a while we realized that we failed to introduce ourselves and that we did not ask anything present to not follow or attach itself to us. The night afterward, my mother told me that she was going to take a bath and asked us if anyone else had to use the restroom. My friends and I said no, and we continued to play our video game. Next thing we know, we heard screams coming from the bathroom. My stepfather ran into the bathroom, and my mother came out wrapped in a towel, mad and upset that we went ghost hunting, and she believed that something was messing with her. She went to her room and got dressed, and came back out and said that her back was burning. I lifted up the back of her shirt to see my initials scratched into her skin. At this time, I was a bit worried and frightened, and I told her to lay on the couch so that I could keep an eye on her, as she said that she was tired. She then woke up a few hours later, but didn't seem fully awake, almost as if she were in a trance, sweating profusely, and her hair was soaked. She began mumbling weird things that we couldn't understand, and started saying 666 and drawing a pentagram in the air with her finger. I decided to look up a prayer, hoping that this would help. I ended up finding the St. Michael prayer, and my friends and I began chanting it. As we were chanting, she began screaming and cursing in a disembodied voice, and then suddenly dropped back down to the couch and passed back out. She woke up like nothing had even happened, and was confused as we explained. After time passed and nothing else occurred, I decided to go to a friend's house who was female. As I was headed there, I got a text message notification that said, "Where are you going? You're not..." I clicked on the notification to finish reading the message, but the text had vanished. I called my mother and asked if anyone from the house had messaged me, and she said no, so ignoring it, I went on over to my friend's house. It was around 1 a.m., so we went to her room and laid in bed, and she got up saying that she had to go to the restroom. As I lay there, I began to hear growling noises coming from her bedroom closet. When she got back, because I wasn't going to go and look, I asked, "Do you have a dog in your closet or something?" And she replied, "No, I don't own a dog. We're not allowed to have animals here." I was freaked out the rest of the night, and didn't fall asleep until almost 4 a.m., listening to see if I could hear anything else. After awakening, of course, I was really tired. I called my mother to make sure everything was okay, and she said that nothing else happened while I was gone. And nothing else has happened since. Moral of the story is don't meddle in things that you don't understand or have not studied or prepared to deal with. I'm still interested in ghost hunting, and may do so in the future as I'm now more educated on the subject, and will take better precautions from here on out. I have had 2 premonitions up to now. Both happened in 1992, a long time ago, but a year full of disasters in the Netherlands. In both dreams, I was standing in front of a window observing the disaster unfolding. These dreams were also so vivid that I can still remember them in clear detail. The first one was that suddenly, I was in an office looking outside overlooking a chemical factory. I immediately knew that it was the Sindhu factory nearby. Suddenly, one of the reactor vessels exploded, setting the whole of the factory into flames. A few days later, on July 8th, 1992, it did indeed happen. A trainee operator used the wrong recipe for the process. The reactor vessel overheated. The company brigade started cooling the vessel down, but to no avail. The vessel exploded. One of the valves was found 2 kilometers away. The 3 firemen died, and 11 other employees were injured, of which 1 had very severe burns. A few months later, at the end of September in 1992, suddenly I again had a vivid dream of standing in front of a window, this time at the Zilmer area in the southeast of Amsterdam. I saw military planes dropping bombs on a block of apartments. In the early evening of October 4th, 1992, an El Al cargo Boeing took off from Amsterdam Airport, heading to Tel Aviv. Just after takeoff, the captain notified traffic control that they had lost power in 2 engines and requested to return. What he didn't know was that he not only lost power in these engines, he physically lost the 2 engines. I think that they were actually the bombs that I thought I saw falling. The captain had very big troubles in controlling the airplane. He made some circles go up to the point that he could not hold the plane anymore, and it plunged almost nose down into the corner where 2 blocks of apartments met. It left a burning hole of rubble, 8 stories over a length of about 10 apartments, gone. The death toll was 43, of which 4 were aboard the plane. I have since then not had these kinds of dreams anymore. Maybe because both disasters happened within a radius of less than 10 kilometers from where I lived back then. I'm 30 now. When I was in my teens and early 20s, I was into really weird stuff. There's a few local shops that sell unusual oddities and antiques in my town, like art made from dead animals, skulls, pickled specimens, things like that. I started pickling my own specimens around age 20, when I figured out that it wasn't that hard. I had some articulated skeletons, but stuff that I was really interested in was supposedly cursed stuff. I bought things people claimed were cursed on eBay, and even drove to different states to buy things from people that they claimed were haunted. I bought 3 different diebuck boxes supposedly cursed from eBay. I bought numerous haunted dolls, whatever I could find. I had some weird taxidermy items too, like a couple 2-headed baby chickens, a 2-headed snake, stuff like that. I had a few things that I wasn't supposed to have either, but I won't get into that. Long story short, nothing weird ever happened. Not a thing. I never had one unusual, creepy experience with any of this stuff. I should start this off by saying, I've never really believed in the paranormal or supernatural. Like, I wouldn't say that I'm a skeptic, because I think to use that term you have to go into something deciding that it isn't real and operate from that perspective. I'm fine with saying I have no idea what it is and I can't explain it. I won't say that I don't believe in ghosts, because I really don't know what a ghost is or what it's supposed to be. I've always been into aliens, and was really obsessed with them when I was younger, but still never fully believed in them. I just kinda liked the idea of them. I'd never seen one, or seen any real proof of one, despite poring over documentary and late-night History Channel binges. So, on the subject of all things paranormal, you could say that I'm a fox molder and that I want to believe, but never really did. Anyway, needless to say, after the following series of events, my mind is quite a bit more open. Though I won't pretend that I can tell you exactly what was going on. So I'm around 21 years old and I'm working at Walmart at the time. We had these steps that we would smoke on that were outside the tire shop that would lead up to another parking lot for a different building. I went out to smoke one day and was by myself and sat at the top of the stairs. As I was smoking, I noticed a paper bag sitting kind of underneath the bushes that were there. I don't know why, but I looked in it. I was expecting to find some empty beer bottles or something, but inside of the bag was a porcelain lamb. It wasn't particularly creepy looking, to be honest. It didn't have bleeding eyes or whatever. It just looked like something that would be on your grandma's shelf. There was a red ribbon around its neck, and it looked really new. When I picked it up, there was a note underneath it in the bag. The note said, "Take me home. I'll be a good little bitch, I promise." I'm not even kidding, it really said that. It was written in red ink and looked like female handwriting. Really neat. It was written on a piece of torn out standard notebook paper. I know how stupid and cliche that it sounds, but that really is what it said. Of course, being me, I brought the thing inside Walmart and stashed it under a register because I was totally gonna take that home. I showed it to my friend who was working there and was kinda like, "Dude, look what I just found outside. Look at this note." And he was like, you should definitely not take that home." But of course I was gonna take it home. I lived for that kind of thing. Anyway, as soon as I set it down, I realized that it was actually a music box, because I jarred it enough, I guess, to make it start playing. I looked at the bottom of it, and it had one of those metal twist pins that you wind up and it plays a tune. I turned it, and it was the least intimidating melody ever. It wasn't creepy at all. I was actually getting legit disappointed, because if you wanted to pull a prank on someone with some scary object, this thing was doing it all wrong. I'm not sure what the melody was. I'd never heard it before, but it was in no way ominous. Fast forward to the end of the workday. I get in my car, come home, and show my then girlfriend. She was into all the same weird things that I was, so she was equally excited about this bizarre discovery. We cleared a space on our dresser for it, and from then on we just referred to it as the lamb. Things started happening immediately, like the next day. Me and my ex didn't have a great relationship, and I spent most of my time in the living room while she hung out in the bedroom. I'd work until around 11 at night, and get home and stay on my computer playing games until around 3 a.m. Then, once she was asleep, I'd go in the bedroom and go to sleep myself. This way, we didn't really have to spend that much time together, and we both quietly preferred it that way. So, the very next day, I'm sitting in the living room and I hear a rustling sound coming from the kitchen. I could see the entire kitchen from where my computer was, and I assumed that it was one of our cats messing with something, but both cats were actually on the floor staring at the kitchen, just as confused as I was. The sound seemed like it was coming from the top of the fridge, and it was like it was rustling around the cereal boxes and bags of chips and such that were up there. I assumed it was a mouse because we had found one in there before, and went over to the kitchen to check for it. I turned on the light, and as I walked in the kitchen, I heard the Grudge noise. I've only seen The Grudge once, because it was one of the only films that ever actually scared me. I'm not easily frightened, and I generally don't care that much for horror movies, but something about the long, frog-like, gurgling croak sound of The Grudge freaked me out when I was younger. The only similar thing that scared me recently was the screaming bear in Annihilation. Anyway, I start walking toward the fridge and I'm totally hearing the Grudge noise. Just to reiterate, this is only impactful because this is literally one of the only things that I've ever been scared of, and it was coming directly from the top of the fridge where the rustling sound had been. I froze dead in place, and so did my cats. They did not want to go anywhere near that. I had no idea what to do. I was literally on the verge of passing out. So I tried to articulate this in my head, and I decided that the fridge must be broken, that a fan or something in it must be grinding. I crammed that thought into my head, and I sat back down in my chair and put on my headphones. I did leave the light on, I'll admit. Normally, I sat in total darkness. I was really trying to convince myself that the fridge was making that sound, but I was finding it incredibly hard to do so. I was also in panic mode, and I was thinking, what do movies and ghost shows and stuff say? Don't acknowledge that it exists? So I became the dad in every horror film, and I just said, "The fridge is broken," and went back to playing WoW while on the verge of jumping out of my own skin and using my headphones to drown out the noise. I actually sat there for way longer than I normally even played WoW because I was genuinely terrified to either move or take my headphones off. I had this horrible thought in my head that as soon as I removed my headphones, I would hear the noise like right next to my ear and turn and some old woman would eat my face or something. I had no idea how long it went on or when it stopped. I literally sat there until sunrise. I never went to sleep, and I used an Elvis playlist and chatting to my guildmates in WoW to distract me as best as I could. But I literally just sat there frozen in terror the entire night until the sun came up and my girlfriend woke up. She came in the living room around 8 a.m. and was pissed off at me because I never went to bed. She complained that I played games too much, even though we both knew she didn't want me around any more than I wanted to be around her. But our relationship issues aside, she was badgering me about being on the computer all night, and I just said, I don't want to talk about it. And she let it go. She softened up quite a bit, looked a little confused, but I think that she could tell I was freaked out. Then she proceeded to freak me out even further. She showed me her arm and said the cat scratched the hell out of me last night. And she did indeed have what appeared to be a cat scratch running down the length of her forearm. The problem was, she kept the bedroom door closed, and like I said, both of the cats were in the living room with me, and I hadn't moved from that chair. No one let the cat in the bedroom. In fact, when sunrise came, they were still almost in the exact same spot staring at the kitchen that they had been in when I went back to playing WoW. I didn't say anything about it. I just said, oh, dang, and I felt like I was going to be sick. Since I hadn't slept, I called into work that day, even though in reality I really just wanted to leave. So I did an unusual thing, and me and my girlfriend went bowling for the day, then to a movie, then dinner. I was clearly acting weird because we never did anything together, and I was obviously trying to avoid the house. I asked if she wanted to go night fishing, and she finally asked me what the hell was going on. I didn't tell her, though. I didn't want to talk about it. She declined my generous offer to fish in the dark, and we ended up going home. We started our nightly ritual. She retired to the bedroom to watch TV, and I stayed in the living room. The grudge noise started within an hour of me sitting down. This time, as soon as it started, I willed my completely stiff in fear body to get up and walk down the hall to the bathroom. I left my computer running and WoW open, and said I felt like watching TV. My girlfriend again remarked that I was acting weird, and I again declined to talk about it. I couldn't hear the grudge noise from the bedroom. I took some Benadryl and went to sleep when she did, which was hours before I normally went to bed. The next day I went to work, and at around 9 p.m. she called me. I was the manager of the toys department, and had a bit of leeway in using my phone, since no one really supervised me. I answered, and she was on the phone freaking out, screaming into my ear, and I could hear knocking in the background and couldn't really make out what she was saying. But finally, I made out a sentence. She was saying, "There's banging, someone's trying to get in through the walls." I left work and drove home and stayed on the phone with her the whole time, and at some point on my drive home, she left the house and started running down the street. I picked her up in her pajamas as I was driving back, and she again claimed that someone was trying to break in through the walls. She heard banging on all 4 walls of the bedroom. By this point, I was pretty certain I knew exactly what she was hearing, but I still didn't want to say anything about it. I wanted her to calm down, and I told her that it was just animals. I said that I had seen some squirrels going into a hole in the side of the wall and was afraid that we might have them in our walls. Of course, this was entirely made up, but it actually worked, and she did calm down. She didn't know squirrels could live in your walls, and I convinced her that this was the case, and I told her that I would call an exterminator in the morning and have them come out and check on everything. We went back to the house, much to my despair. My squirrel story had worked on her, but that was short-lived. The way our house was set up, we had a bathroom that was connected to our bedroom, but not by a door, just by the wall. So you had to leave our bedroom, and the bathroom was the next room on the right, so the bathroom wall and our bedroom wall were the same wall. Make sense? Anyway, we got inside, she went to the bathroom and immediately started screaming again. I went in there to see what she was screaming at, and it looked like a tiger had been clawing at the bedroom wall. The one connected to our wall. The wallpaper was torn off about 6 feet high, and there were large gashes in the drywall beneath it. Reminder, this is all about 4 days into having this lamb. At this point, we got in the car and I told her about the sound I had been hearing. Her initial reaction was that we needed to get rid of the lamb, but something told me that I couldn't. She wanted to just donate it to a thrift shop or something, but I had this weird sense of unease about doing so. I felt like we couldn't just get rid of it that way. Like someone had to know what it was and want to take it from us. I can't explain why I felt that way. I just did. At this point, we did what you probably would not expect, and we actually just lived with it. Like, this went on every day. We had rules about it. The first rule was that we never talked about it in the house. We never even mentioned it. We pretended that the lamb did not even exist. It was like that episode of Family Guy where they had a giant octopus living in the house and just no one wanted to talk about it. When we had something to say about it, we would always say, "Let's go for a drive," and the other person would know what that meant. The clawing at the bathroom wall was getting deeper all the time. Eventually, there was a huge hole in the drywall, and it was starting to claw through the drywall that was connected to our bedroom. That was when I really started to freak out. For about a year, we lived with everything. We just ignored it and pretended like nothing was happening. Every night I sat with the grudge noise. Things would fly off of shelves, doors would slam. Straight up paranormal activity, BS, every single day. One of the worst ones was one of our pickled specimens jars just exploded. It was a bird that we had had for a while, and the mason jar exploded on the mantel in the living room. Glass went everywhere, and it took hours to find it all. The bird itself also completely exploded, sending body parts splattering around the living room. It was hell. And I had a few friends that I would tell about it every day when I came into work. Like, they would ask for updates on what the lamb had been doing, and I would tell them whatever freaky story we had for the previous day. It was a daily occurrence at that point. But then, it got to a point where we couldn't ignore it anymore. My girlfriend was breaking up with bruises and scratches almost every day to the point that it had started looking like she was self-harming. She had a lot of piercings and tattoos, so she wasn't too troubled by the pain, but didn't really enjoy having to wash the blood out of the sheets every day. When it got too much was when I was sitting in the bathroom browsing my phone and I heard a female voice say, "Hey, come here." So I finished my business and walked into the bedroom and said, "Did you call me?" And she replied with, "I was really hoping that was you." This is about 6 months in. At this point, it started talking. Like literally speaking. It had a little girl's voice. I know again, that's so cliche and stupid sounding, but it would occasionally speak, and we would hear it. We never responded to it. Everything we'd read on the subject told us to never, ever respond. We'd hear it at our door at night, saying things like, "Can I come in, please? Please let me in." At this point, you've probably tuned this out and chalked this up as some kind of excessively long, poorly written creepypasta, but I promise you, it isn't. Her whole family knew about it as well. All my friends did. Everyone knew about this thing. When we had friends come over, they would ask us about certain things that the lamb had destroyed, like, "What's up with the bathroom wall?" And we'd just respond by shaking our heads, and they got the message. Eventually, no one came to our place anymore. They all said that it freaked them out to be there and that they were terrified just to walk inside. Even her parents stopped coming over. Her mother wouldn't even drive down our street. Still, we ignored it. As best we could, anyway. Until one night, I'm sitting on my computer, and a voice right behind me says, "Hey." I thought it was my girlfriend, so without turning around, I said, "Yeah, what's up?" And the voice responded, Nothing. Then I realized that it wasn't her voice, and I spun around, and nothing was there. I just broke the cardinal rule, and I talked to it. I shot a brick, grabbed my girlfriend, and told her what I did while we drove around in the car. She proceeded to call me an idiot for an hour and asked what we were going to do now. Finally, I decided to Google local paranormal investigators. We contacted a local agency and sent them an email with a more condensed version of everything I've just told you. They responded in a few hours and asked me to send them a picture of the lamb. That was the first time since the day we set it down that I had ever touched it again. I put it in the middle of the kitchen table, grabbed my camera, and took some pictures of it. I sent the pics away in an email and nothing. Until this point, these people had been responding to me in a matter of hours, and now suddenly, an entire day had gone by. Then 2 days. In those 2 days, everything had escalated tenfold. The house was never quiet now. The grudge noise could be heard outside of the house, and it never stopped. Half the electronics didn't work. The TV barely worked. It would flicker on and off. The power would go on and off. The taps would start running and then close. The garbage disposal would turn on. The doors were slamming and opening non-stop. It was completely out of control, and we couldn't stay in the house anymore. Mind you, I wasn't rich. I'm living on a Walmart salary here, but we got a hotel room. I brought a laptop, and I emailed the paranormal investigators again. They replied to me this time and told me the lady who answers the emails was also their, medium or whatever, and that when I sent her the pictures, she locked herself in her house and has refused to come out for the past 2 days. They told me they were sorry, but that whatever I had was out of their league. So great, right? My house is possessed, and now it's gone apeshit because I talked to it, and the paranormal investigators don't even want to mess with it. I contemplated calling a priest or something, but I'm not religious, and I didn't know if I would have to have faith in the Lord Jesus or whatever for it to work. I contacted another paranormal investigations company in the area and sent them the same pics and basically begged them for help. This time they actually responded and were helpful, and they drove down from about 2 hours away just to talk to us. When they showed up at our house, nothing was happening. It was quiet, and everything looked normal. The doors were all closed, no sounds, nothing. Worse yet, they busted out all these gadgets that I'm not going to pretend I knew what they did or what they were for. Some had lights, some made beeps, some buzzed, one made little lasers all over the house. They had recorders, microphone equipment, they saged everywhere, walked around waggling electronics at various locations. I don't know exactly what the hell they were doing, but I at least appreciated that they seemed to be trying. But they weren't getting anything. Nothing was happening. I even recorded bits of it on my own camera. Then all of a sudden, stuff did happen. My camera quit working out of nowhere. The battery just KO'd. All their noisy equipment started making noise, and something was over 9,000. There were 3 people, and they started talking to it like, "If you're here, give me a sign." And then they asked it to knock on stuff, and this went on for 2 hours. Eventually, they wrapped up, and the woman who was with him said that she believed the thing who was inhabiting our lamb wasn't a spirit. She said it wasn't ever a person, and that it was something else. She said that it was pretending to be a child to try and trick us, and the fact that we weren't being tricked was angering it. They left and told me that she would call me the next day. She said she knew someone who might be willing to take it. I couldn't fathom who would want this thing, but my girlfriend and I spent the night in the hotel room again, and I did indeed get a call from the woman the next day. She said that she had spoken with someone called John Zaffis, and that he was excited and wanted the item. I didn't know who that was at the time. She told me he was the haunted collector, but that meant absolutely nothing to me. They said he had a paranormal museum. They came back to the house, got the lamb, and mailed the thing off to him. Later, I realized that the dude had a TV show and is the nephew of Ed and Lorraine Warren. And that's basically it. Once this Zaffis dude had agreed to take it, everything stopped. We never had another weird incident happen again. I never fixed the bathroom wall, though. We moved out when we split up, and left it like that for the people that we sold the house to. On a side note, I recently, like in the last 6 months, watched the Conjuring movies. In a very short scene, I believe, in The Conjuring 2, there's a shot of the Warrens' daughter sleeping in her bed. On her nightstand is an identical lamb to the one that I had. When I saw it, I almost started crying in terror. About a month ago, I started a new job doing security at a local community college. Being the new guy, I was pretty much shafted with the night shift right off the bat. Normally, I work from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. on weekdays, and 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. on the weekends. It's a nice job, good pay, plenty of overtime. The campus doesn't have dorms, and I'm the only one here at night. It gets lonely and very quiet. Watching the security cameras is monotonous, and patrolling the empty dark halls can only be done for so long before boredom really starts to set in. When I first started, I had the expectation that I would be given the worst shift at the worst times, and I was right. I was put on the night schedule before I even got to see the place, really. It used to be an old Catholic academy for girls until the late 60s. It isn't particularly secluded, but more suburban. It sits up on a hill overlooking a highway. It has 5 floors in the new part of the building, 4 floors in the old convent and chapel wings. It was first opened in the 1890s by a religious order of nuns, particularly for young ladies who also wanted to be nuns. It grew out of that until eventually attendance dwindled, and it was sold to the state, who in turn converted it into a community college after almost a decade of disrepair. I'm not someone who dabbles in the occult or knows a lot about the supernatural. I mind my own business and try to do my job. But recently, this place has got me in rare form. I don't scare easily now. But just in the short time that I have worked here, I've started to think that something is up. The security cameras are typical CCTV cameras. No audio recordings. But in the monitor, I'll hear a crackling like static. There's no way to enable or disable audio on the monitor. It comes and goes. I'll hear footsteps, like leather soles clopping down the hallways through the security monitor. When I go on patrols in the convent wing, the lockers that are typically reserved for the cleaning crew and faculty staff will be unlocked and wide open. I've seen them open on the cameras, but only my supervisor can play back the footage. Doors that I know I locked during my first patrol will then be unlocked and open on the 3rd patrol. The motion sensors will detect something and turn on when I'm not even on that floor, and when I am, sometimes they don't even react to when I move down the hall. And when I go to what is now the library, it used to be the chapel, I can hear piano music coming from the hall where I had just came from. I don't really drink anymore. I don't do any drugs, prescribed or not. There's no history of mental illness, and this isn't just a one-time thing. I'm not sure how to tell my supervisor about it without sounding mad or cowardly. I don't even know if I'm posting this in the right area. Only 4 more hours left in my shift, anyway. During the past few years, my gifts of clairvoyancy have developed further, which has created some moments where I truly have questioned my sanity. Former teachers of mine have communicated to me from beyond their grave, 2 of them have led me to where they are buried, and I have predicted 3 district deaths. The first teacher to come through was actually a nurse from the local school, followed by my 6th grade social studies teacher. I was aware that the nurse had passed away in 2012, so I wasn't surprised when she came through. However, I was unaware of the second one passing, and immediately went into denial mode. Eventually, through clues via dreams and meditation, I was able to locate her final resting place. I went from being in denial to being absolutely speechless. I followed the clues that she gave me, and there I was, at her grave. It was at that moment that I realized that what I was dealing with was reality, and that I was not losing my mind. The creepy thing is the numbers of her plot are the same as the numbers in the school district where she taught. As I was visiting her on March 1st, 2017, I had a flash or image prediction about another former teacher passing away, and they would be buried in the same cemetery. On March 6th, another one of my 6th grade teachers passed away, and a few days later they were buried in the same cemetery. The process repeated itself, and he led me to where he is buried. That isn't the only death or dreams, visions that I've had. I've had 2 others. One was in December of 2016, hours after the teacher passed away, and one was in June 2017, 6 months prior to her passing. There seems to be no time structure when it comes to dreams or visions, and the time of passing itself. It ranges in hours after to 6 months before. A couple of months ago I had another dream, and while nothing has happened as of yet, I am very concerned. This happened about 9 years ago. My mom had made this friend who claimed to be psychic. I've never really believed that she was, but that's a completely different story to tell. Anyway, she said that she enjoyed going ghost hunting. Mind you, this is when Ghost Hunters was a pretty popular show, and my mom, sisters, and I decided that it would be fun. We didn't have the special equipment that they had, but we did have a video camera and a voice recorder. We were good to go. We visited several cemeteries that summer, and got some pretty awesome footage, which I can share later. This one has always stuck with me. So, in doing research on where we should go next, I found a post about the cemetery in Lafayette, Colorado. It said supposedly that a vampire was buried there. The post said that some people believed this because he was from Transylvania, and a tree grew right up through the middle of the grave where they said his heart would have been. We decided to go. About 3 hours later, we showed up at this cemetery that looks more like a park. We get out of the car and begin walking into the cemetery, looking through all the headstones. Not very far into our walk, we come to the vampire's resting place. The headstone is a plain slab of concrete with a line down the middle and the name of the man, when he died, and where he was from. My sister, toting the video camera, comes walking up next to me and says, "So this is your stake, huh?" We didn't hear anything weird, and continued to walk around after that. The cemetery was pretty mild in comparison to the others that we had been to. The feelings weren't overbearing or scary. Suddenly, Sandy comes running toward us, whispering frantically, we have to leave right now, they're coming." She's the psychic one. Anyway, we start rushing back to the car, and suddenly these police officers on bikes come riding up. They gave us a warning, saying that the park was officially closed for the evening, but that we could visit during the day. We drove home and plugged in the camera to check the footage. We got to the part where Elizabeth had asked, "So this is your stake, huh?" A reply immediately came saying, "Yes, my stake." We went back several times to make sure that we weren't imagining it, but every single one of us heard those words. Skip forward a few years. I was taking my mom to the dentist, and when we got there in the waiting room, there was a book of the most haunted places in Colorado. Well, of course it piqued my interest. During her visit, I scanned the book, and about halfway through, I came to the page about the Lafayette vampire. The crew who investigated his grave had asked a similar question to Elizabeth's, and the response that they got, wait for it, yes, my steak. I started laughing. We were so sure that we had imagined it because we had wanted to hear it. But there's no imagining two separate groups of people who got the same exact response. If you ever get to Lafayette, Colorado, check it out. The cemetery isn't a scary or overly creepy one, but the response that you get from the vampire is real. The man or men in the grave weren't actually vampires. They were mine workers. And if I remember correctly, they died of the 1918 Spanish flu. They were poor and didn't have the money to send their bodies back to their homes for burial, so they are buried here. I hope you enjoy this one as much as I have for the last several years. It's definitely one moment or two that I will never forget. At the time when this happened, I was around 12 years old, living with my mom in a run-down apartment complex. The building we lived in was the smallest of the three in the complex, and it was shaped like an L, with our apartment being closest to the inside corner on the shorter side of the L. To our right was one other apartment with another single mother and her son, who was much younger than me. Below us was a family with 2 kids that I was friends with, and the apartment above us was empty. It wasn't the nicest area, so after dark we kept our windows and doors closed and locked. The reason I'm going into such detail is so that you can understand why I believe that this voice didn't come from anywhere other than in our apartment. We were up late one night. It was around 11 p.m., and my mom was looking at something on her computer. She and I would typically stay up late hanging out together, so this was completely usual behavior. The computer was tucked into one corner of our quote-unquote dining room, basically just a patch of linoleum off from the kitchen, and our living room was to our backs. We didn't have the TV on, nor did we have any other lights on other than the one in the dining room itself. I can't remember what we were looking at, but I do recall this sudden feeling that we were being watched. Many things that I attribute to unexplained paranormal activity happened while we were living here, so the feeling of being watched was incredibly uncomfortable, but not anything out of the ordinary. As I was beginning to shift in my seat to turn and look around, we both heard a sinister male voice say, "Meow." Conversation level, neither a whisper nor a yell. Drawn out in an exaggerated, almost lilting tone, as if it were mocking us. I would say it took around 2 to 3 seconds for this voice to finish, and in that time I was able to feel every hair on my entire body stand on end. We immediately spun around, me nearly falling out of my chair to the floor, both of us nearly hyperventilating in absolute terror. My mom said something about, "If you aren't good, get the fuck out," or something to that effect. I'm honestly not sure how I slept that night, or any of the other nights we were there for, but we never heard anything like that again. I recently had an experience that I'm just not sure about. I tried explaining it to my sister, and I can't even begin to put into words everything that happened and how I felt. So recently I went on a bit of a road trip and visited a bunch of places in the Southwest, Utah and Colorado, Arizona, and Southern California. I stopped at a park in Colorado that I hadn't initially planned on going to, but had never been to, a place well known for its Native American history. It was absolutely beautiful. Honestly, it was amazing and humbling to see the history of the people there. It made me realize that there was so much more about American history than the rather Eurocentric view of colonialism that I was taught. Anyways, like I said, it was amazing. Given that this was November and very off-season, half the park was inaccessible and attendance was minimal. There were other people, but overall it was very quiet. I had been viewing some building ruins atop the mesa, one huge multi-room building, and not that far away another large building with a very large kiva in the middle, and on the southern side of the building, number 2, was a solstice carving on the wall. I was walking around the smaller solstice building, as there was a couple walking around the large building, and I enjoyed the quietness of being alone. And when I went to the large building, they went to the solstice building, and then they left and I was going back to the solstice building to get some more pics of the solstice marker. I was now alone. It's hard to describe exactly what I felt and how everything went down, but I'll try. It was a pretty nice day, temperature in the upper mid-50s. I'm from the Midwest, so that's still shorts weather to me. Some light, small clouds, but not many, pleasant breeze, and a few birds chirping away, and more than a few chipmunks all over the place. As I walked around the solstice building, everything just became still. Like the wind stopped, the animals went silent and disappeared. It was just weird. There was a large, darkish cloud that came kind of out of nowhere and just hung there. There was a weird heaviness all over. And then there was this smell like what I thought was just a dead animal. Like that sickly sweet smell of rotting meat. I assumed that there was just a dead deer or rabbit or something nearby that the wind had been blowing the smell away, but the wind was gone and everything was just still and heavy. As I reached the solstice marker wall, I noticed that on top of the wall, mind you, the walls are only 2 foot high or so, there was a piece of pottery. I swear that this pottery had not been there before, and it wasn't there in any of my first set of pictures looking back. It was a large, broken piece, but now that I think back, it was really clean. The blacks and the whites were incredibly clear. I went and picked it up to get a closer look, and it was really beautiful. A kind of stair pattern and then an angled set of lines. It was really pretty, but it felt off, oddly heavy for its size. I wanted to keep it, and I wanted to take it, and just kept staring at it for what felt like... God, it's so hard to describe how I felt, but the time stood still, and all I wanted was this pottery. Even now, thinking about it, I still get this weird, longing for it. As I held it, everything was just silent and heavy, and that smell was just so strong. But suddenly, there was this huge raven out of nowhere. Legit, it was on the wall 5 feet away from me, and it was the largest bird that I had ever seen in the wild. This huge raven just cawed and flapped its wings, and I kind of snapped back to reality. Honestly, it was bigger than a friggin' condor. Its body was easily 3 foot tall, and its wingspan was just massive. I put the pottery piece down on the wall, back where I picked it up from, and just looked at this bird, and the bird just looked back at me, and I turned and walked away. Just like that, the dark clouds blew off, and the wind returned, and there were other birds chirping, and the smell disappeared. Actually, the smell all but vanished when the giant raven appeared. I got about 10 feet away from where I had been standing, just around the corner of the solstice ruins, and I turned around to see the raven, and it was gone. I didn't hear it flap its wings to fly away, and I didn't see anything in the sky, not even a shadow on the ground. It was just gone. And so was the piece of pottery. It was no longer on the wall. I went back to my car and headed back to the visitor center, as besides being totally weirded out over what had happened, it was getting late in the day and I had a fair bit of driving to do to get to my next stop down in Arizona. I had a good 35 minutes drive back to the park entrance to reflect on what had happened and how strange I had felt. Honestly, I felt like I had downed a bunch of Benadryl. I was so foggy until the raven showed up. Even now, I just really can't explain everything that I felt. When I got to the visitor center, I was the only person in the visitor center proper besides the employees, and one guy was just leaving as I entered. In the gift shop, I was getting a mug. I get a mug from each park I visit, and was talking to the park ranger and the cashier, who was an older American Indian woman, about how awesome that the park was, and how I wished that I had learned more about these cultures in school, etc. when I told them about the piece of pottery. I also said something like, "Oh yeah, up at the far view sites, there's a dead animal too. When the wind dies down, you can smell it." And the park ranger and the cashier quickly looked at each other, and then back to me. The cashier asked me if the smell had come before the piece of pottery, and I said yeah, that the wind had stopped and that the animals were all quiet, and I basically told them everything I said above, minus the intense urge to steal the piece of pottery, and they just looked at each other a few times and kept quiet. Except when I told them about this huge raven and how it appeared. The cashier let out a gasp. When I finished my story, they had a few questions about the timing of things, how long everything lasted, and in what order everything had happened, and they asked me to describe the pottery and stuff, and all of a sudden the cashier said, "Would you like some tea?" I love tea and was like, "Yeah, actually that sounds wonderful, thank you," and she went and got some. The ranger and I walked back towards the employee break room down the hall past the artifact restoration exhibit, and she asked where I was and what I knew about the area, and I told her about how truly minimal my knowledge was about the native cultures, even those closer to my Midwestern home. When the cashier returned, she handed me a cup of sage tea, and she asked if I was honest about what had happened. I was really confused, and said yeah, and she told me to drink. The tea kind of tasted like a no-salt vegetable stock. I wished then that I had had some honey and lemon. Then they told me about what they think that I had been near. Apparently they hear a few different stories concerning skinwalker activity throughout the year, but none where someone sees the raven, and that's why they're telling me this. The cashier proceeded to tell me a bit about skinwalkers and how sometimes they curse objects to lure unsuspecting people in. She also said that the fact that the raven had appeared and removed whatever enchantments that I felt was very important, that someone greater than us was watching out for me at that moment, because even though skinwalkers can choose many different animal forms, they would never appear as a raven due to the spiritual importance of these birds. She said that if the raven appeared to me, they could share certain information with me that they would never share with anyone. She told me that the sage would help cleanse me of any remnants of the skinwalker's tricks, and suggested that I see a shaman. I had already finished the cup of tea and was getting a little freaked out, but oddly felt more calm after hearing her speak, and I thanked them and left. I tried not to run to my car, but walked very quickly and got out of there. That night, and a night or two later, I had some very vivid dreams, but I can't remember anything of them, which is odd. I usually remember my dreams when I wake up, at least long enough to write them down. But these dreams, even though they woke me up, I couldn't recall them. I don't really know what happened, or if they were just pulling my leg, but once I got home and really started looking into these things, I kind of feel... I don't know. I feel like I'm crazy, because I can't rationalize what happened. Even when writing this, I realize how insane it all sounds, and I still can't even fully describe it. How weird everything got. It's just hard to put it into words.
Unfortunately, my dad died earlier this year, and the way he died was terrible, in which my whole family has to go to therapy. Yet, I still miss him and love him always. To get into the experience, I've moved around a lot this year due to personal problems since my dad's passing. I also got 2 puppies this year from the same litter. Lost my dad and dog on the same day. Kind of like a replacement for the 2 loved ones that I did lose. One of the dogs was quiet and usually pretty chill, except that he had these moments where he would start staring at a wall or something in the room randomly, when he wouldn't normally do this.
I know that dogs have a sixth sense about paranormal stuff, as well as cats and other animals. This behavior would happen about each month, around 2 to 3 times since I got him in May. Then I moved again to my godfather's house, which he's my dad's older brother. There are still some tense feelings here and there because it's a very sensitive topic for my godparents and dad's side of the family to talk about my dad, or even to see videos or pictures of him. Around the same time I started my new job, where it would require me waking up at 2, 3, sometimes 4 in the morning to leave for work. In front of my room, there'd be like a tiny light that's usually on sometimes when people forget to turn it off. There's nothing in the way of that light that could ever cause a shadow. One day I was leaving for work. It was about a week ago. I go to get my shoes, and I'm about to leave through the front door when I look up, and in front of the light, there is a shadow of a person. I immediately recognized who it was. It was my dad. The only reason I know him is because of his shoulders and height. I looked and saw his big shoulders and his head. I blinked, and then it went away. I closed the door to the house and went to my car. Until about 10 minutes later, it hit me again that I had just seen my father. I think I cried about it after work, but I couldn't tell anyone for fear of them thinking that I've lost my mind. I lived in Adams, Tennessee growing up, from about the ages of 14 to 18. A couple of weeks after my family and I moved there, something unexpected happened. I was mowing on my dad's tractor with a big 8-foot wide back-end mower. I was going down a hill when my horizon line violently was thrown around as the tractor tires hit something. I disengaged the mower, pulled the tractor around at the base of hill that I had just gone down. My blood went cold as I looked up through the swath I had just cut, like a buzzer going down the middle of someone's head making a lane for the grass. In that lane were 4 Native American burial sites. My parents started reaching out to anyone who might be able to help us identify the graves. Anthropologists, historians, accredited people, etc. Those people unanimously agreed that these 4 graves were from the Trail of Tears. They corroborated this from what I remember because of how the graves were laid, very, very shallow, with a giant slab of stone where a gravestone would normally be. The fact that they were interned on a hillside to keep the water from sinking in and raising the bodies since they had to bury them so quickly, and many other reasons. I consider myself a very logically driven and rationally minded person. Basically, I let my empirical senses try to explain something before I'll open myself to other possibilities. Yet, there were things that happened to me and my whole family that we weren't able to rationalize with the scientific mindset, or with anything logical. Event 1 occurred when the activity in our house started shortly after the mowing incident. We heard heavy knocking and pounding on the brick outer wall of the house encircling the house. No matter where you were in the house, you could hear that sound. Some nights I would hear running footsteps accompanying the pounding. This activity happened nearly every single night. As the nights passed, I started feeling a heavy presence in my room. A suffocating one, like a heavy weight sitting on my solar plexus constantly. Whatever was happening decided to latch onto my sister and I. She reported tightness in her chest too, and would wake up violently screaming from scratch marks and pieces of her hair that had been pulled out. The scratches started happening to me as well. Event 2 is that things continued to escalate. One night I was letting my golden retriever go out to use the bathroom. We had a ranch-style house overlooking the Red River. The door we were exiting was on the back side of the house facing the water. As I open the door, I start hearing faint whispering, something akin to leaves being blown or scratching across the ground. I looked up at the trees to see if the wind was blowing, but everything was perfectly still. It was fall in Tennessee, so there were tons of leaves on the ground, and they were not moving either. The scratchy/blowing leaf noise continued, but as it continued, it grew closer and louder. It sounded like a language of some sort, like how you'd imagine an incantation or something nefarious in the tone of the sound. I looked down at my golden retriever. All of the hair on her back was standing up, and she was snarling like a rabid wolf, yet not barking, just kind of frozen in some sort of fear response. I started getting extremely nauseous and could smell sulfur. I was completely frozen when my dog launched herself through the door's threshold and started gnashing her teeth mid-air while snarling and chomping. The voices were now coming from directly in front of me. I could hear them as if someone were standing there just a foot or two away. I grabbed my dog and pulled her quickly inside, slamming the door and throwing the deadbolt into place. The door and frame shook violently as a vicious pounding started hammering on the threshold. I ran with my dog to the middle of the house, flipping on every light along the way. We sat there alone all night until the sun came up. My parents were out of town supporting my sister in a competition. Ginger, my golden retriever, laid across my lap the entire night, pressing into me while she whimpered for hours. All I could do was pet her and try to calm her down, which was also helping me. This was impossible, though, completely. The entire night until sunrise, the back door was thumping. Event 3 happened when I was coming home from football practice. I had all my gear in a gym bag over my left shoulder. This is important because of how I entered the house. As I closed the front door behind me, I began sitting down the gear bag from my left side, which caused me to look right. The room when you first walked in was our quote-unquote library, where we had a leather couch, chair, piano, bookshelves, and a wooden rocking chair. There was something sitting in the rocking chair. My peripheral vision caught it first, the chair just going back and forth. As my vision centered on the chair, there was a humanoid-looking shape, head glancing downward at the book that it was holding. It had long black hair drawn down over its head and completely void of light. To picture what I saw, imagine the silhouette of a person in 3D form. The light coming in and around the edges of it seemed to be eaten up by the presence or void, as if the light spilled over the contour edges of the humanoid shape, like how black holes are visualized, almost exactly. It felt like I had jumped off of a bridge into ice-cold water. I blasted myself backward against the door, screaming, and fell down. As I was falling, I saw the void blur suddenly as it shot across the walls of the house and out through a huge bay window overlooking the river. My golden retriever was in the next room, and she came running to chase the shadow across the walls, barking and clawing at the plaster. After it left through the window, my dog came to see me and laid on my lap until my parents got home. Event 4 occurred while I was fishing with my cousin Jack on the river by our house. We were right on the bend of the river, so the moon would be shining through on both sides, racing out at 2 lines like a 90-degree angle from the house. Super beautiful when you aren't on edge. The reason I bring this up is because there was a lot of light on the river that evening. Jack was about 10 or so at the time. He reaches up and taps me and says, "Does that lady need help?" I looked to where he was pointing, and there was a pale woman dressed in white clothes going back and forth picking up stones just to the left of us across the river. I had seen her many times before around the property, and whenever I would get close, she would disappear behind a tree or something. Knowing this, I told Jack as calmly as I could that it was time for dinner and that he needed to go up to my mom immediately. When I walked him up and made sure that he was on his way, I looked back and she was gone, but I could hear a splashing sound in the water below. When Event 5 occurred, it was myself, my dad, his friends, and some other family members who were staked out along the river bend on the gravel bar beneath the rise to our house. As usual, nothing out of the ordinary happened at first. It was July 4th, and we were actually having a really good time for a change. We were all spread out about 15 yards away from each other. Each man had a low-end gas Coleman lantern. As the sun was setting, my dad looked over at me like something was bothering him. He told me later that he felt as if someone had just thrown a bucket of ice water over him before it began. The sun had just gone down when this happened. In unison, all the lanterns were cranked up full blast, then just as quickly became barely aflame, and then the flames roared to life again, down to barely aflame, roared to life, and then they went completely out. Right as the flames went out, we heard the most God-forsaken scream by some woman across the river. Whatever it was kept on screaming despite our best attempts to call out to help. As her scream reached a crescendo, it sounded like what I could only imagine as a person's throat being cut interrupted her. The sound of a dead weight fall of a human body tumbled down the hillside across from us and splashed violently into the water. At this point, all the guys had their flashlights out. That's when something started swimming and splashing around in the water on both sides of the river bend. The splashing receded toward the opposite gravel bar, and whatever it was got out and started pacing back and forth across the rocks there. We were pointing all of our flashlights to where the sound was coming from, but we couldn't identify where it was originating. It's safe to say we were all running up the hill at this point. We all went inside the house, locked the doors, then gathered in the central living room. Nobody wanted to leave for fear of what might be out there. We stayed up all that night because the wall pounding was more violent than it had ever been. Bam. 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 All night, like the ticking of some demonic clock. I didn't sleep for 2 days after this event. Event 6 came in the form of lost time. I was walking through the woods near the Bell Witch Cave. One moment it was completely sunny, blue skies, and about mid-afternoon. The next moment it was overcast and looked like it was maybe 4 p.m. I still have no idea what happened there. Event 7 was night terrors. Torture dreams, being held down and brutally drawn and quartered. Dreams of walking through the house and the void person placing their hand on my chest and pushing through my solar plexus, body violently shaking in the dream as if I were having a seizure. Event 8 happened as I visited the Bell House plantation marker in a tobacco field adjacent to my family's property. I brought friends to try and prove that something crazy was happening to my family. The rite of passage in the area is to go to the stone marker where the paranormal events happened hundreds of years ago, then dance on the stones saying, "I don't believe in the Bell Witch." I got them to promise they wouldn't do that while we went. Of course, the moment when we got there, one guy who doubted the legends in a massive way jumps up onto the stone marker and starts screaming, "I don't believe in the Bell Witch," as loud as he could. I got so upset at him. I'm the only one that knows the way back, so I said, "Come on guys, we're leaving." In this area it's known as the Tennessee River Valley, so there's tons of flowing water, etc. around these tobacco fields. The reason this is important is because of what happened next. We're making good time walking back across this crop field, hundreds of yards long. A mist starts rolling in from the river bends and begins to saturate the field. The temperature drops easily 25 degrees or so, and we start to see our breath. I begin to smell sulfur in the breeze. As the mist became a fog, it began. I started hearing this wheezy and deeply cavernous sounding breath all around us, like being inside a cave that was breathing. Out of nowhere, we started hearing these giant blasting sounds, and I realized something was walking on the chopped tobacco stalks. Side note, when they harvest tobacco, they use a machete and cut down at a 45-degree angle, leaving about 3.5 feet of brittle stalk poking out of the ground. When you step on said stalks, they disintegrate in a very loud way as they burst apart. This starts happening all around us, like an army of native spirits running around us like a bandwagon battle. The blasts were coming from every single direction in the fog. That's when I hear it. The deep, cavernous noise turns into this giant, sniffing sound, like some Lovecraftian beast smelling its prey just out of sight. At this point, I yell "run" in pure panic mode. We take off across the field, trying not to trip and be skewered on the stalks. As we are exiting the field and our feet hit the gravel road, my lower center part of my back suddenly explodes in agony. I look down, and there's a massive rock lying at my feet, and I realized that I had just been assaulted. By the time I got to my house and examined my back in a mirror, the bruise was about the size of a basketball and was already turning black. And now for event 9. I woke up outside at about 3 in the morning. I was lying next to the 4 gravestones on the property. The night was awfully cold, but when I woke up, I was soaked in sweat. While going through a tough time in my relationship, I decided to move in with my mom for a few months for a break from the chaos. A guy I had met through a mutual friend of ours offered to pick me up in his truck and take us for a drive through the mountain trails behind my mother's house. Bored out of my mind with TV and food, I agreed. He arrived, I got in. We drove to the top of the ridge at the beginning of one of the trails where we stopped to roll up really quick. 5 or 10 minutes later, we were slowly driving along, listening to music, talking, laughing, realizing that we had actually been neighbors years before. The song on the truck radio was changing, and there began a softer song. We could hear the wind blowing quietly through the trees, and all of a sudden there was a whisper. "She's with him," the voice said, extremely clearly. I did not know what to do. I mean, what were they talking about? And even more importantly, who were they? We continued to drive down a trail a bit longer because my guy friend said it would be bad not to show dominance to whatever it was and not to run scared, ever. But it was, in fact, the scariest moment of my life. I should clarify also that this is in the middle of nowhere in the middle of nowhere. My mom has no neighbors for miles. Hunters are allowed on the property, but none were in the area. We shined headlights in the direction of the whisper, and there was nothing. The first and only time I've ever seen a ghost, a dead person, a demon, whatever you want to call it, was exactly 1 year ago today. I had just gotten my bachelor after 3 years of studying social welfare and was now working at a group home for teens with substance use problems. My workplace was in a big old house, which was almost scary quiet during the nighttime, and I often felt anxious being there. Don't get me wrong, I really enjoyed the job and spending time with the teens, but working nights scared the crap out of me. I usually started my shift around 8 p.m. Around that time we often made dinner. I helped out with homework, and we talked for hours dealing with all sorts of issues until I went to bed, usually around 1 a.m., and this was one of those days. I fell asleep at 1:30, woke up 2 hours later like I usually do to get a glass of water. I walked down the stairs, entered the common room, and then walked by a big window in the living room. I looked up at the gray, cloudy sky when I saw death hanging in a tree. Brown, rotten flesh in the shape of a face. I rubbed my eyes, and then looked again, and the flesh was still there. I couldn't move, breathe, or blink my eyes for a few seconds. I was absolutely terrified. After a while, I found the strength to move my legs and walked into the office again. I locked the door and sat there all night, and when the sun finally peeked out, I managed to move my legs to go and look out the window again. There was no rotten flesh this time,
just a normal tree with green leaves. A few days later after this incident, I told my boss that I didn't want to work night shifts anymore since the lack of sleep. I didn't want to tell her the real reason, since she would probably think that I was mad. Maybe I was. And what if this was just a nightmare? Probably. But what if it wasn't? I'm going to tell about my experience, but for certain reasons I will not be naming anyone specifically. It was 2014. I was 13 years old at the time, and my great-grandmother was in a nursing home as her mental health had started to slip and as my great-aunt and uncle couldn't take care of her anymore. I remember the last time that I had seen her in person. It was a sunny January afternoon, and me, my parents, grandparents, and my aunt and uncle had decided to talk outside as opposed to the sad, depressing clinical interior of the nursing home. Despite my great-grandmother having memory issues, she recognized me right away and told me specifically hello. It's March of 2014, and during the night, I'm having memory flashbacks of things that me and my great-grandmother used to do, like stringing long strands of old-fashioned buttons, or the time I had my first ever garden-grown tomato raw, sitting on the porch swing with her while my grandfather worked in the field. I remember waking up that morning and asking, almost demanding my mother to call the nursing home, or my great-aunt and uncle, and she called them while I took a shower. After I got done, my mother informed me that my grandmother had indeed passed away from old age. I spent the rest of the day walking around our house in an almost trance-like state. I work for a nonprofit that helps mentally and physically disabled people live fulfilling lives. J and C are brothers. I work for the same company as C, but at a different house. There are several houses around the city and bordering area. He works at the houses that only house children, 4 of them, I believe. His story begins on a graveyard shift, which he was working with one coworker, a middle-aged woman. The house has alarms on the doors and windows, which are alarmed during the night to let them know if any kids try to leave when they shouldn't. C was downstairs in the office. His coworker was upstairs cleaning. Suddenly, the alarms in the house went off, every door and window. He sprang up, assuming that the clients were planning some mass breakout, as he would later refer to it. He yelled up to his coworker to head out one door. He went out the other, frantically looking for whoever was outside. He saw one client standing beneath a tree, but apparently not in any hurry. He thought he recognized the client to be someone we'll call B. He said, "B, head back inside," or something to that effect. He continued searching for the other clients, but after running around in a panic, found no one. He gave up and headed inside to reconvene with his coworker. He said he found B, but no one else. She stunned him when she revealed that everyone was inside, never having left, including B. He said she must be mistaken. He was just outside beneath a big tree in the backyard. She had fear on her face when he insisted this. She explained how what he saw was in fact what staff of that house referred to as white dress, a ghostly woman wearing all white that seems to reside on the property and is often seen under that tree. Needless to say, he was surprised and confused, and definitely creeped out, but the story doesn't end there. Sometime later, a client from another home whom C was very close to sadly died. He was sick for a while, and C was present for his final breaths in the hospital. He was wheelchair-bound when he was alive, and later a client at the white dress home needed a wheelchair temporarily while recovering from a slip-and-fall accident. They brought the wheelchair that used to belong to K. Right away, B began fixating on it. When it was no longer in use, B would take it for his own enjoyment. Staff took note of this, and couldn't explain why he loved it so much. He would take it outside to a small hill, push it down the hill empty, and then return it to the top and do it again, over and over. B is nonverbal, in that he can't speak with spoken language, but he does understand speech and communicates using gestures. One useful gesture has him select Staff's right or left hand in a sort of this or that conversation. For example, I could hold out my hand and say, "B, do you want tacos for dinner?" Identify it as my left hand option. Or do you want burgers for dinner? Right hand. And then he would choose. He also had a tic, where he would hold his palm up to his face very close and sort of mumble into it. This is actually what C thought he saw when White Dress was under the tree. He thought B was there, and that he was doing that. This is important because B would often do this gesture when he played with the wheelchair. Staff got curious and thought that they might be able to determine who B was talking to and playing with in the wheelchair. They posed a sequence of this or that questions with fake names. B, who's in the wheelchair? Is it Michael or Emily? No response. Is it James or Samuel? No response. Is it Stephanie or Teresa? Again, no response. They did this a few times before inserting the real name. Is it Kay or Jen? Right away, he selected the correct hand. Everyone present was shocked. According to C, he was the only real link between Kay and this house. B and Kay didn't know each other, and he didn't believe anyone talked of the previous owner of the wheelchair, so he can't explain how B seemingly knew Kay's name. This story still doesn't end there, however. For reasons unknown to me, C took the wheelchair home for a while. Maybe it was a keepsake. Regardless, he brought it home with him and weird things started happening around his house. C and J, like I said, are brothers. They live in a big house and rent it out with their girlfriends as well as 2 others. One day, everyone was out except for J as well as C's girlfriend. Both of them claimed that the door to C's room slammed much too loudly and hard to be explained by wind, especially since no windows in his bedroom were open. This happened a few times while the wheelchair was there, which is made more interesting when you know that Kay would often get C's attention by slamming doors. Jay said other strange things had happened once the wheelchair arrived too, but I'm not sure what they were and don't want to confabulate the details. I do know that he claimed to once hear someone calling out his name, but no one was home except him. As I said in the opening of this post, both J and C were and still remain skeptics. They agreed that these events are all strange, but ultimately they aren't convinced. I too am what I call a hopeful skeptic. I would love for any sort of paranormal subjects in the world to be verified, but I guess I just need to see it myself to believe it. I grew up in a haunted house, rather a haunted neighborhood. It's an old Air Force base that has since been recommissioned for college students and families that go to school on the outskirts of town. Growing up there, I have experienced many strange things, most of which I cannot explain besides it being paranormal. Even though I know a good bit about the paranormal or the occult, some of these entities proved out of my knowledge base. I've seen my little sisters double, seen multiple shadows in the house with a friend present, had things move around, knocks on doors when no one else was home or asleep, footsteps up and down the hallway, conversations that would mute when you got close to them, and so many other occurrences. However, one of the creepiest ones always happened at the main bathroom. It had a small hallway branching from the main hallway. It wasn't very long, but I never felt safe there. During the night, even as a growing adult, I would run as fast as I could because I feared what was behind me. I slowly stopped doing so because I realized that whatever it was got some kind of sick pleasure from it. It slowly started to not feel like there was a presence nearby as much, but was still there. One evening, as I'm taking a shower getting ready for bed, I hear a knock.
but not from the door. It came from the medicine cabinet, so being the curious person that I am, I peeled back the shower curtain to see some of the fog having been wiped off of the mirror. I started to take a closer look when I saw a black, slanted eye with no skin around it start to peek its way into my line of sight. I quickly hopped back into the shower and sat there back against the wall, not knowing what to do. I eventually turned the shower off and hauled ass out of there, still dripping wet. The next time I saw this thing, I was walking down the hall after getting home from school, and I'm the only one home. So I start to do what male teenagers do when no one was around. I hear some scuffling like dogs running around, and a door open. I ready myself for someone to be home, and as I walk out of my bedroom door, I hear a, "Hey," but muted and not a voice that I knew. So I start making my way toward the front door with my back to the wall, as I felt I might need to dash back to my room for safety. My mistake here was that I was facing the hallway that leads to the bathroom. I move over bit by bit, and I hear another voice, one that seems to be coming from the living room, so I take another step. Then I see something in the corner of my eye, like a hand pulling back from a corner. I couldn't make it out at the time, but it didn't freak me out enough until I got into full view of the hallway with this thing standing there in a grotesque way. Black slanted eyes, no skin anywhere, black claws, and smelled something awful, more of rotting meat than rotting eggs. I froze for a second before I saw it flinch, a little like it was coming for me, and I dashed back to my room, slamming the door behind me, only to get 3 knocks every few seconds. I don't remember what I said, but it was something along the lines of, "I'm not going to be afraid of you, you can't get past this door." And then it stopped. I waited there until someone got home, to which I went outside for the rest of the day, making sure I didn't have to use the restroom at night for any reason. A few months go by, and I'm still uncomfortable with this bathroom and the hallway, but not as much has happened since, so my guard starts to slip. One night, I believe it was a Friday night, I was taking a late night shower. Everything was going as normal, wash my hair, face, body, when suddenly the lights go out. There was a storm going on in town, and we were getting the weak part of it, so I didn't really think anything about the lights. I stepped out to turn on the lights and see if the house actually had power. Sure enough, the house did have power, but the bathroom wasn't turning on, yet the exhaust fan was still on. That's when I started to get really worried and turned the lights on one more time, and with no avail, and decided to keep my shower going in the dark. As I got back into the shower, I could feel something breathing on me, on the back of my neck, my shoulders. I felt a few brushes of what I hoped was just my towel and not something else. As I'm getting out of the shower, I'm drying my hair off, and the lights come back on. Awesome, I'm thinking as I start to dry my face. When I pull the towel off, I look up and the mirror once again doesn't have fog, but the whole lot of it, not just one part. I looked up a little more and just saw the thing there, right behind me, making a smile of sorts, but its mouth was sewn shut, or so it appeared. I stood there for about 5 seconds, unable to move before slowly feeling its claw on my shoulder close to my neck. Suddenly I became unparalyzed and again left the bathroom dripping wet, running to my bedroom door. I slam it shut, shaken and trying to gather my nerves. I hear a deep, yet simultaneously high-pitched sort of laughter, and then I heard the bathroom door close. I went to bed that night with the lights on, all the while hearing more footsteps than usual in the hallway. I've seen the thing twice more, but thankfully those experiences were nowhere near as scary as the one mentioned above, since I've learned to deal with it and how to protect myself. I haven't heard much of skinless humanoids, so this is one thing that has always stuck with me. I will preface this by saying that I think I'm silly to believe in ghosts, and I get embarrassed to speak about it. The alternative to believing that I was haunted is admitting that I am much more mentally ill than I had ever believed, which is absolutely possible. This took place over a few years in a farmhouse in the desert of Arizona. It was newly developed land. We moved into the place when I was 15. At the time, I was going through a lot emotionally and smoking a lot of weed. That might explain some of my personal experiences, so I'll try not to dwell on them too much. The house was set up almost plantation style. It was very wide, had a big wraparound porch, and lots of awkward corners. The front room was a tall library with an open balcony to the upstairs, which ran into long, skinny bedrooms. My parents' room was closest to the stairs and was attached to a nursery with a sliding ensuite door. My brother's rooms, who were 2 years younger than me, and my room were at the end of a dark hallway. That side of the house never got sun, so it had bad vibes all around. Downstairs, there was a messed up Harry Potter-style closet, a sunken-in living room, a kitchen in the center of the house, and a sunken playroom for the baby. It honestly started the first day that we moved in. My brother and I were the only ones in the house, and we were unboxing plates. It was so empty that everything in there echoed. I swear it sounded like a little girl laughed, like a creepy track that you could get off of an app or something. Keep in mind, the TVs were not plugged in. We were on an acre of land, far away from the dirt road, and my brother was way too stupid to pull a prank like that. I started hearing voices at night. This wasn't unusual. I honestly used to freak myself out so badly that I think I made noises up to scare myself. My parents had raised me not to talk about things scaring me, to tough it out and be a big girl. It was fine most of the time during the day. Everything bad came at night. I remember distinctly when it started messing with me in bed. In solidarity, my brother and I kept our bedroom doors open for the hallway's nightlight, and in case we needed to call for each other. We had a pretty messed up childhood that might have contributed to all the codependency I'll describe during this. I was falling asleep, but not quite out. I felt the blanket slipping off the bed and reached down to grab it. This was common. I didn't have a bed frame with a foot. It kept slipping no matter how I tried to tuck it. In classic horror movie fashion, the last time I pulled it, I felt tension. There was nothing it could have been caught on. I felt like the second I went from confused to terrified, it bounced back to me. I don't know how to explain this that well, but I was certain that someone was under the bed pulling it away from me. Later, I moved another nightlight into the bedroom. It was a kind of spooky amber orange, and I convinced my parents to let me paint the walls cherry red. Again, I was almost asleep, but not quite out, so I don't think it could have been sleep paralysis. I heard the carpet rustle, and maybe joints cracking. It sounded like my mom had come in to check on me. I opened my eyes, and immediately froze. I don't think I've ever been more scared in my life. There was a woman crawling across my floor from the far side of my room to the foot of my bed. She was pale and stringy-haired as if she were going bald. I couldn't see her face. I don't know how I fell asleep. I couldn't scream or move. I think she disappeared under my bed. But again, this could always be a hallucination. My baby brother was about 7 months old when she started coming out during the day. My mom was a teacher at the time and was able to stay home with us during summer vacation. It was lunchtime and we were watching a movie quietly downstairs while the baby napped. There were noises upstairs, as if something had been dropped to the ground. We listened for a second before my mom ran up. She thought the baby had fallen out of his crib. We opened the door and found him sound asleep. There was weird white stuff on the floor. It took us a while to figure out that it was drywall or something like that. There was a crawl space to a small attic where the AC and insulation could be reached. It was barely big enough to get into and a good 9 feet from the ground. It also had to be pushed up and slid over to open. There was a visible gap. The carpet was a really ugly dark blue, so we could see the white spots on the ground as if something had been dragged from one side of the room to where the crib was, and it stopped right in front of it. My mom checked the closet and called my stepdad. He couldn't leave work, so he stayed downstairs until he got home and checked the crawl space. We have never had animals. It's really difficult for most things to live in Arizona, so wildlife is pretty rare in that area. He didn't find anything, or signs of anything living up there. This happened every other day for 2 weeks. We really didn't know what to make of it. My mom thought it might be the AC suctioning the opening upward. It stopped and didn't happen again for 2.5 years, until my baby sister was born and stayed in the same crib. Again, it happened on and off for a few weeks, and never again. To keep my own solo experiences brief, I had a period of 3 months where I straight up did not sleep. I went crazy. Every night, I felt like my bed was shaking. The instant I laid my head down, it would vibrate, the metal frame would sway, and I would feel as if something was pushing the mattress between the baseboards or sitting on the corner. I had my brother touch the frame one night to tell me if the shaking was in my head or not. He said it wasn't, but I'm still not sure if he wasn't just playing into it. I thought I might be having seizures or something. At one point I got so frustrated I started sleeping on the couch downstairs with the dog. I started hearing whispers too. Not a noise that sounded odd, but someone calling my name. My name has 3 freaking syllables. I would be in my room, door open, doing something at night after my parents went to bed. It was a female voice, but it sounded off. I don't know how to explain it. The downstairs really scared me after the lights went out, so I never went down, but I did walk to the balcony and look. I never saw anything, but the whispering would stop when I got close. My brother started hearing it too. He's kind of weird. His life's dream has been enlisting in the army, so his reaction was always getting his knife and walking right downstairs to confront it. He would turn the lights on and look around before coming right back up. He slept on my floor a few nights because he was convinced that she wanted me. We had prior haunting experiences, which led to my parents making jokes that the ghosts follow us. They didn't pay much attention to it at the time when it was quiet. One night my parents went out with the babies. My brother and I were in our rooms, doors open per usual. We started hearing something strange. At first, I thought it was the wind. It got louder until it was clear that a woman was wailing. I know it sounds crazy, but it was so clear. We hid in my room for what felt like hours, calling my mom. For some reason, it never occurred to us to call the police. Eventually, the crying stopped. We hatched a plan to run for the stairs and out the nearest door. All of the lights were on in the house, and my brother has his stupid knives. It's like it knew that we were going to leave. We heard shuffling outside the door, and maybe breathing? I guess it could have been the air conditioning. We kind of decided that we were ready to die, unlocked the door, and booked it. The crying started again, and it was very clear that it was coming from my parents' room. We stood outside the property line for another hour waiting for them to arrive, watching the house. No one could have gotten out without us seeing. We had huge windows lining the upstairs hallway that showed everything with the lights on. My parents again made fun of us, and still do about that night. A few other incidents include my baby brother talking to the man upstairs. He would stand in front of the balcony and chat up to someone. He told us that the man was hiding in my room. He talked about the man in the window and would ask, "Who's that?" directed to the doors at night. I don't want to talk about all of it, but there were so many instances of voices, doors slamming, and things being knocked over in my room that I really did think I was losing my mind. I moved out at 18 and came back occasionally, usually to babysit. Apparently, my reluctant believer mother and absolute skeptic stepdad watched a coffee pot jump off of the counter. They were also outside sitting and having an open fire while drinking a coffee when they saw a figure in the balcony window of our room. It was a tall man, but my stepdad still needed urging to go upstairs. It appeared a second time, closer to where the nursery door was. My mom said she had horrible dreams about a man in the corner of her room after that. She was present for many of the instances where we heard footsteps upstairs, doors slamming when the AC was off, etc., but she always denied that there was anything wrong. Once my parents left town with the kids for a week. At this point I was 19 and living happily an hour away. My mom begged me to check on my brother and stay a few nights for the weekend. I arrived during the evening after I got off of work. I asked how had things been when he was alone. He said he was fine, he just didn't go upstairs at night and, quote-unquote, minded his business. He said if he ignored it and tried not to get scared, then it, in return, ignored him. He felt safe with the dog. We were watching YouTube and eating when we started to hear a deep noise. At first I thought it was a bike or one of the small buggies that people drove out here. Then I noticed that it was holding a tune. It was humming. The dog had a weird thing about staring into the bathroom if the door was open, which is scary at night. This time, the door was closed, and he still stood up and stared. The noise was so deep that it sounded as if it couldn't have been human, but it was definitely melodic. There's nothing I could think to figure out to try and explain it. My brother and I just kind of looked at each other. Then, a door slammed upstairs, and we decided to nope out of there and go for a walk. When we got back, I decided that I would sleep in my parents' room. It didn't feel right to stay in the kids' room, but looking back, it would have been best to stay close to my brother. I fell asleep surprisingly easy. I guess about 2 hours passed before my brother slammed the door open. The house smelled like it was burning. Not really like a fire smell, but more like burning plastic and trash. I was panicked. I was the adult and had no idea what to do in that situation. We checked the house. I turned off the air conditioning, thinking it might be on fire. We opened all the windows and fell asleep on the couches downstairs. The next day the smell was still lingering, but less overwhelming. The air conditioner was fine when I turned it back on. Like usual, the day was fine. That next night, my brother and I went on a jack-in-the-box run. It might have taken 30 minutes. We arrived home to a mess of blood, vomit, and shit. The dog was sick all over the living room. We immediately took him to an emergency vet, certain that he was dying. They checked him for everything that they could and gave him a clean bill. When we got home, all hell broke loose. My brother and I were cleaning up the mess with the doors open for airflow. There were absolutely insane banging noises coming from upstairs. We hadn't locked up on the way out. My brother thought that someone had snuck in and was trashing the place. He went up to check, and I hung out downstairs ready to call the cops if need be. Nothing happened. Nothing even seemed out of place. We kept cleaning, but the noise started almost immediately. It kind of sounded like someone was shouting behind a wall of cement. I couldn't tell the gender. My brother told me he had been fine until I got there, that I could leave if I wanted. I totally did, and I didn't go back. My parents sold the house this year. During the interim of the move, they stayed in an Airbnb. My brother lived really close to his work, so he stayed in the house with the dog for a few weeks. This story is just his own, so I'm not sure if I believe it. Like I said, he's kind of strange, but he's also not really one to embellish. He had been hearing the usual things, even his name being called in the night, but ignored all of it. His friends had been coming over to keep him company. The last day he was supposed to finish moving, he brought another friend. He says he felt that they were being watched the whole time when they cleared the place out, and his friend left him to lock up. They got into the car facing the house when they noticed that the blinds were open. They were definitely closed on the way out. His friend claims that he saw them open from the corner of his eye. My brother says that there is a woman squatting in front of a downstairs window, close to where he had just left from. She was pale, her nose was hooked, and her hair was black and stringy. Again, classic horror movie ghost. He said she had black eyes with visible white dots in the centers. Inside-out eyes, as he called them. And she was smiling. He says it took him a second of shock to realize that she was looking directly at him. He felt sick, like she could walk right out and get him. They burned rubber when his friend snapped out of it, and they screamed at each other all the way down the road about what they saw. He called me right after to explain it, but I was with my own friends and not really willing to listen at the time. What messes me up is that my mom thought he had a psychotic break. He went into his room and cried all night at the Airbnb. She thought something had happened with his girlfriend. My brother is not a crier. I haven't seen him do that since we were little. When we got together and talked about it, his eyes teared up then, too. He said he didn't know why, but he knew that she wanted to kill him. He drew a picture of her. It's not great, but it still fills me with the deepest foreboding. It took me a while to realize that I saw her too, just once in my bedroom almost 5 years ago. Suddenly it made sense. I knew it didn't feel like a woman, but it felt feminine, like something pretending to be a woman. My ex brought this up today. We dated all through high school and had a few experiences together that she recounts as her only paranormal encounters. I would love to still think that this was my own delusion, but it was shared by way too many people. Maybe a few things can be explained, but most of it truly can't. It has affected me so deeply that I'm still terrified that if I think too much about her, she'll follow us a state away. One night, I was working a night shift in a refinery. I was working as a quote-unquote hole watch for my shift, which means I basically sit at an entrance and document anyone that goes in and out. Well, a guy showed up, I got his name, and he gave me the company that he worked for, so I logged him in. Everything checked out, so I'm waiting at the entrance for a few hours for the guy to come back out. Now, that's nothing unusual, because most of the people that go in will stay in there between 2 to 6 hours at a time, and every hour or two I yell up to make sure that they're okay. I would yell, and usually the guys whistle back or make a noise to let me know that everything's alright, and every time I check, I thought I heard a response. A few more guys came up to go in. I log them in, let them know that there's another guy up there doing inspections. They go in and radio back, "Hey, there's no one in here." Immediately I had a weird feeling because I was at the only exit entrance, so there's no possible way to get out of the container without me seeing. The way the container is set up, you have to climb up a ladder to get into it from underneath using a scaffold to help. I was sitting on the scaffold far back enough to where if anybody came out, they would drop down right in front of me, and the only way off of it was to go through the gate opening that I was guarding. So I radio my foreman and explained to him what had happened. He got into contact with the company and they had no one by that name and no one scheduled to check that particular container. I was completely baffled at this point. Here I am, adamant as ever that someone went up into that container. I thought I was going crazy and I was also a little weirded out. I had a signature on the log where they sign in, and I have to sign right next to their name also, acknowledging that I know that they're going in. For about 20 minutes, I'm in full panic mode and freaking out because I don't have an explanation as to what happened, or where he went, or who he was. And on top of that, I could have easily lost my job because of it. I'm going to start this out by giving some background on my mother. She's currently 58, a nurse, and a devoted Christian. Other than the occasional drink, she doesn't do anything to alter her mind. This story begins one day when my mom laid down for a nap. The way she described it, she wasn't asleep, but she began to see a video of sorts repeating in her head as soon as she closed her eyes. She saw a young teenage girl dressed in a schoolgirl outfit, floating away in a boat and waving. My mom could feel her emotions, her sadness and worry for her grandmother as she said goodbye. She could feel that this girl was going to a peaceful place. As well as this, she saw a calendar turn 3 times. This vision repeated itself once or twice, until my mother came to. She thought it was a vision of our family friend Shannon, but it didn't look quite like her. Later on, during the month of March, there was a shooting at a local rave. Shannon's younger sister was shot and killed. She was wearing the exact schoolgirl outfit that my mother saw her in during the vision. The fact that it happened in March means that the calendar was a warning of what was to come. We are unsure of why exactly my mom was meant to see this, but we were able to provide some comfort to the family by letting them know that she was somewhere safe and peaceful. About 10 years ago, I moved into a new home in Indiana with 3 roommates. I won't go into too much detail about where the home is located out of respect for my former roommates, one of which still lives there. I will say that it is located in a very old part of town, a few blocks off of one of the very first main roads that used to be in the town that was settled in 1846, I believe. Anyway, this house was definitely not what comes to mind when you picture a haunted house. It was built sometime in the early 80s or early 90s. It was pretty ordinary looking. 3 bedrooms with a small loft area, tiny bathrooms, and not a whole lot of room for 4 adults to spread out. But when you're a college student in your early 20s and have the opportunity to split rent 4 ways, this seemed perfect. We had all our own tiny little spaces, shared a kitchen and living room, and spent most of our time just bullshitting around the dining room table. The house was owned by an older couple who lived in a city about 20 minutes away. They began renting the home out to help finance their retirement. They were sweet, and pretty relaxed on any rules for the home. They told us right off the bat that they were not physically fit enough to do any maintenance or repairs on the house should anything go wrong, so we were told to call them with any issues, and they would send over their handyman, or whichever professional was needed. They never came to the house. Not once. We paid rent by money order through the mail. I didn't find this strange at the time. The first weird event occurred about a week after we all moved in. We all worked the night shift at our respective jobs, so the house was empty all night and we arrived home around the same time early in the morning. We dragged ass into the living room to enjoy some sort of fast food breakfast before passing out when we realized that the entire carpet downstairs was soaked. A pipe had burst beneath our dishwasher during the night and flooded the kitchen, dining room, and living room. Our landlords had the floor replaced within a week, and we went on with our lives. Then, about a week later, we were baking cookies in the oven when all of a sudden the cookies burst into flames. The oven was producing so much heat that I was afraid that the whole thing would catch on fire. The landlord sent a repairman who told us that something had caused the internal thermometer in the oven to be so uncalibrated that you could set the oven temp to 300 degrees, but it would be more like 475 in there. Again, we had it fixed and moved on. It wasn't long after that when the unexplainable and unnerving activity began. The ceiling fans in the rooms would turn on randomly and they would spin so hard that they would rattle and shake to the point that it looked like the thing was about to fly off of the ceiling. Every room was equipped with button switches. There are 4 buttons on the wall, 1 for the light and the other 3 for various speeds for the fan. The fan would make a 2-tone chiming noise when you would push the button to turn it on. No one would be able to turn on a fan without pretty much everyone in the house hearing this chime. We were creeped out, but chalked it up to faulty wiring or a power surge. That chime still haunts my dreams. Then came the TV issue. We all pulled together to buy a large flat-screen TV for our living room. Brand new, name brand, extra warranty. The TV would turn on by itself constantly. We returned it to the store, exchanging it for a new one, and thought it would be fine. We would be outside or in a different room and hear the chime, go turn the fan off, and realize that the TV had just turned itself on. This happened 5 or 6 times a day. It was unable to be ignored. 2 separate things in 2 different rooms turning on almost simultaneously. The electrician was called. He found no signs of faulty wiring, and I think he thought we were making it up. After months of this, we began to hear the whistling. 3 notes whistled by an unseen force at all times during the day. This would usually happen when you were in a room by yourself. I would get this sick, anxious feeling like I was being watched, and right then, I would hear the whistle. Someone or something wanted our attention, and he got it. 3 of us were totally convinced that our house was haunted. Our other roommate was a skeptic, and also pretty much had to make this living situation work, or he would be sleeping in his car. About 1.5 years of living in this house, dealing with constant phenomena, it ramped up again. We would be in the kitchen making dinner, go eat in the living room, and come back to find every cabinet door open. Sometimes the refrigerator and oven doors were open too. This happened probably 3 or 4 times a week, on top of all the other crap. I was over it, but had no idea how to fix it. I went to Borders bookstore and got a few books about ghosts and hauntings and different information about getting rid of the creepies in one's home. I decided to do a smudging, and I could not have been more sorry about that decision. We planned to do all the sage smudging together, and our Catholic roommate also had his priest come in and do a house blessing that same day. Holy oil and water were sprinkled in each room, the smell of white sage burning. We thought it was over. The next morning, I was walking downstairs like I had 1,000,000 times before, when my feet completely flew out from under me and I was airborne. I remember thinking, this isn't possible, right before I smashed into the stairs. I landed on my back, right at the edge of them. Picture Lucy pulling the football away before Charlie Brown can kick it, and his tiny feet are kicking in the air. I was Charlie Brown. I landed not on my butt or side, but squarely on my thoracic spine, the upper area of my spine. How on earth did I defy gravity? I had now tripped. I was barefoot on carpeted stairs, sober, and holding the railing. I didn't feel a push. I felt a sweeping force take my legs out from under me. I broke 4 vertebrae in my back, about parallel with my shoulder blades. I've had injections and nerve damage and back braces and a chronic pain that isn't normal for someone in their 20s. I began to look for a new place to live. I found out that I was pregnant with my son about 2 months later, and decided that the risk was too great to live in that house pregnant, so I packed up that night, told my roommates that I would continue to pay my portion of the rent until our lease was up, and moved back in with my parents. I was only staying with my parents for about a month before finding a new safe place for my baby, my now husband, and I. But I lived constantly on edge thinking, what if it followed me? It didn't. What did follow me are the nightmares where I relive the feeling of terror and dread washing over me, and every so often, I can still hear the whistle. When I was a kid, younger than 12, my mom took me to visit her old friends at their apartment. It was decorated in an odd fashion. Tapestries hung all over the place with old antique furniture and knickknacks lining the walls. We didn't visit there long at all. On our way out the door, my mom pointed out a statue that they had in their living room.
It had a beard, eyes that looked straight ahead, and a walking stick that connected to the base of the statue. It was about half my height, hand-carved solid dark wood, and was sort of tribal-looking. I remember thinking, I really hope they don't offer to let her have that thing. It's scary. And, of course, they gave it to her. I felt uncomfortable sharing the car ride back home with the statue. My mom was raving about how cool it was all the way there. I couldn't have been less happy. After we made it back, she placed it down next to the fridge in the kitchen, right outside the entryway. That sucked because our kitchen was the center of our house. Anywhere you wanted to go, you usually had to walk through the kitchen. So I told my mom how much I hated the statue, and how I really hated the idea of it being there in particular. My mom told me that I was just being silly, so there it stayed. I didn't get a wink of sleep that night. I couldn't stop thinking about the statue being on the other end of the house, and it terrified me. It made me feel unsafe. I don't know what I found to be so threatening about it, but the next day my grandmother agreed with my feelings. She told my mom that the statue made her very uneasy, and that it had a negative energy. My mom told her that she was overreacting, and that she wasn't getting rid of the statue. I felt constant anxiety. I would often refuse to leave my bedroom in the morning after having violent nightmares involving the statue. It was always something along the lines of the statue becoming animate and stabbing me to death with its walking stick. When I walked through the kitchen, I would literally push my back against the wall and edge around the room to avoid getting near the damn thing. In time, even my mom's friends agreed that it kinda weirded them out too. I hated it. And despite how much it scared people, my mom still wouldn't get rid of it. Though she did finally agree to move it to the living room in a more secluded space. One night I was sitting in the dining room doing my homework, and my mom was in the living room with her friend. I heard whispering that was akin to what you'd hear in a horror movie. Cryptic, overlapping, incoherent whispers. I immediately knew that the voices didn't belong to my mom or her friend, so I went into the living room to ask them if they had heard anything, and before I could speak, the look on their faces told me everything. My mom told me to come closer to her and said, "We heard them too." We all agreed that the sound was unmistakably close to us, and it was clear as day. The source of the sound had come from, you guessed it, around the same spot that the statue had been moved to. We all just sort of stared at the statue for a minute blankly, and I don't remember what else was said after that. But still, my mom refused to get rid of the statue. The nightmares continued. My anxiety grew worse and worse. Bad things constantly happened in the house. My mom got pregnant sometime around then, and had to be hospitalized, so I went to live with my grandma for a bit. I told her all about how my mom never got rid of the statue, and how I had never felt safe since it arrived. I told her about the nights that I felt someone looming over me, and the times when I locked myself in the bathroom because I heard noise coming from it. After my mom delivered my baby brother, I moved back home. My grandma explained to me that she had burnt the statue long ago, and didn't care how my mom felt about it because I didn't deserve to live in fear over a stupid piece of wood. Once the statue was long gone, my mom finally stopped being stubborn and agreed that strange things had occurred. I was finally able to walk through my house again without tiptoeing around it, but sometimes I still felt off about the house after that.
This happened about 7 years ago, and still creeps me out. My husband and I were living in this little above-garage apartment that only had like 4 little rooms. It was built in the 1920s. There were a lot of strange occurrences in the apartment before this event, but I thought nothing of it.
My husband was in college at the time working on his associate's degree. Neither of us was working. I had no cell service at this point, and my husband's phone was our only real working phone. I had a phone with no service on it except for an internet service called MagicJack, so that I could call out when he was in class in case I needed help. If it went to voicemail, it would record everything. This is important to this story. One morning, he calls the MagicJack line to check in on me. He heard the line pick up, then nothing but static. Next morning, my husband had woken me up before, as usual. It was a day off for him. He wakes me up in hysterics. Something had been captured on the line. He played it for me. There was a very clear growl, and then a voice saying what sounds like, "Leave." Very gravelly and angry. Up until this point, my husband didn't believe in the paranormal. He was made a believer that day. Have any of you had something like this happen to you before? How did it change your outlook on the unknown? There's this large section of southwest Austin, Texas that used to be known as the Eanes Marshall Ranch. There's a story to be found about a man who was murdered by bandits, and his body was buried in an unmarked grave on the side of the dirt road after being discovered by the ranch owner. Eventually, the body was found by police over 100 years later while searching for evidence of deer poaching. Thus, a local ghost story was reinvigorated and spread to a new generation. When I was in high school, my friends and I got it in our heads to go out there and do some ghost hunting before the house was torn down to make way for a church. We took a couple of disposable film cameras, along with a Ouija board, and headed out under the cover of dark. We got there a little after 11 p.m. We hung around for several hours, taking photos of nothing, literally pointing the cameras into the darkness and saying, "May I please take your picture?" Click. We had a no smoking rule, and we were not using the flash for the outside shots. We made our way back inside the main house. The smallest member of the group shimmied through an unsecured window in a small side room and opened a door for the rest of us. We took some photos inside with the flash on. My friends spent a good bit of time on the Ouija board. I declined to participate in that part, and went outside. They came out and claimed to have contacted an entity through the Ouija board. I was like, okay, sure. We left after all the film was spent, and we got bored with it. We never did hear the legendary wagon or horses that supposedly come through. Nothing spooky happened at all while we were there. The next day, the cameras were dropped off at Eckerd's to be sent off for development. A few days later, the rolls came back with a lot of black nothing, which was to be expected when taking photos outside at night with no flash. There were a few shots that were taken inside the house while using a flash that had some things that you might call orbs, but those could be explained away as dust or bugs. However, the photo I'm talking about still sends chills down my spine every time I see it. We were very strict about not using the flash outside and not smoking, as I said. We wanted to have our best chance at capturing something like this without having a seed of doubt that it could have been a trick of the light or of the camera. Two of my friends who took part in the Ouija session had several unexplained glass-breaking incidents. They said it happened whenever they were talking about the entity or said its name. They were sitting in the car while parked when the passenger window formed spiderweb cracks like a rock had hit it, but no impact was heard. A few days later, glass cups fell out of their kitchen cabinets, no fronts, just open shelves, when no one was in the kitchen and all the cats were in the living room with them. More than a few of their picture frames had the glass shatter while still hanging on the wall.
When they stopped mentioning the entity's name, the activity calmed down and eventually stopped. In 2011, my older cousin bought a small, 2-bedroom, single house in a quiet neighborhood for retired folks. The house was very small, with only 850 square feet of interior space, but it sat on a large plot of land. We could have easily fit 2 more houses like it on that lot, and still would have nice leftover space for yards and gardening. I was still a college student at that time, and I lived with my cousin. When he bought the house, I moved in with him. There were the 2 of us living there. According to the real estate agent, the house had been abandoned for around 3 years. The previous owner basically left it unmaintained and moved to a different state. The house had 1 main floor, a small attic, and an unfinished basement. The first time we walked in, the floorboards were already rotted out. We could see the basement through them. Everything was in horrible condition, and we would have to do major restoration to make it livable again. The property also had a small storage shed in the back of the lot. My cousin got a great offer, so he took the deal without much hesitation. Weird things started to happen when we began our restoration work. One day we were working on the bathroom. My cousin told me that he had to go to Home Depot for some stuff, and so he left. I heard him open the door, go outside, close it, turn on his car, and drive away. I was taking apart the old boards that were nailed on the bathroom walls. My back was facing the bathroom door. 5 minutes after my cousin left, the bathroom door, which was open, started to slowly move to the closed position. I knew this because I could hear the creaky old door sound that it made. I turned around and saw the door continue to close on its own. Then it stopped just as it touched the door frame and bounced back a little. I thought maybe it's just the wind. Then, suddenly the door pulled itself shut tightly, as if there was someone on the other side of the door. It happened right in front of me. I was only 4 feet away. No wind could have done that. Plus, all the windows were closed around the house, so there couldn't possibly be any form of breeze. You might think that maybe the AC caused it, but no. This old house did not have central AC. We had to put in window AC units afterward. At this point, I thought my cousin was messing with me, so I called out to him, but there was no response. Just silence. I opened the door, continued to call for him, telling him to stop playing around. But my cousin was not there. I checked the parking lot, and he was, in fact, gone. I even got outside and did a perimeter check, but no one was there, and I still cannot explain what happened. After the restoration was done, we moved in. My cousin sometimes went on business trips for weeks, and there would just be me in the house. The following happened whenever I was alone. One night I was studying and had my headphones on. I heard sounds of someone walking around in the basement, which was directly below my bedroom. It sounded like they had slippers on, and I could hear the sound of them dragging on the concrete floor with each step. What's weird was that I could not pinpoint exactly which direction in which it was coming from. It's a strange sensation when the sounds were coming from the back of my head, as if they were just right behind me. The only reason that made me think that it's the basement was because the basement was the only area in the house that had concrete and that could have made the concrete slipper dragging sound. So I took out my headphones, and the sounds of the footsteps still went on. The volume of the sounds stayed the same, with or without the headphones. I thought my cousin had come home early, so I called out to him and got no reply. I took the flashlight and went to the basement to check it out. It was dark and quiet. No one else was there. This happened 3 or 4 more times within the first 2 months that I lived in that house. After that, I didn't experience anything unusual anymore. My cousin never felt or saw anything weird, but he seemed interested in my stories. His girlfriend, now wife, who had been to the house every other week or so, also expressed her uneasy feelings during her stays. By 2016, during a thunderstorm, the thunder struck our storage shed in the backyard and burned everything inside it. Luckily, the house was untouched. I came home from work only to find a police officer waiting at the front. He told me what had happened and said that it was an act of God and that our insurance would compensate for the loss. In our Asian culture, people say that when thunder strikes somewhere, often it is to strike down a malevolent force or spirit. We quickly formed the realization that this thunder strike was more than just an accident. I got my own place and moved out a few months after the fire. My cousin bought another house with his wife a year after that. He still owns the creepy house, and it's been left unoccupied since 2017. He plans to tear down the old house and build a larger one to take advantage of the large plot of land. The experiences at this house were the closest I've got to what could be considered paranormal. I work at a mental health facility. Strange things happen a lot, like doors closing and opening, seeing things out of the corner of your eye. You know, normal, creepy hospital stuff. Well, I had the creepiest experience. One night about a year ago, I'm working on the adolescent unit, night shift. I just saw something move out of the corner of my eye. Then immediately afterward, this girl comes running out of her room screaming that the devil comes at 3:33. She's just repeating it over and over again. We get her some meds, and she goes back to sleep. The next night, it happens again. This time I look back at the clock, and it is in fact 3:33. They don't have clocks in their rooms, and they can't have watches, so there's no way that she knew what time that it was. We played back the camera, and she just went from dead asleep to balls to the wall. So this girl does this every single night for her entire stay, which was about 5 days. During that time, the quote-unquote creepy hospital stuff seemed to happen even more. Random door buzzers were going off, doors were opening and closing, lights were flickering. That creepy being watched, hair sticking up on your neck feeling was happening all the time. Every day she would say that she didn't remember getting up, and had no idea what we were talking about. About a week afterward, she got transferred to a long-term facility. I get called to receive a report for a patient that was being sent to us. I'm reading through the notes, and at the very end, quote-unquote, parents report patient repeatedly says that the devil comes at 3:33. I check the name to see if it's the same girl. It wasn't. I called the on-call physician, and he immediately declined the patient. To this day, all the staff have no idea what happened. So I've been doing some spirit box investigation at the house I share with my fiancé. The last 2 nights we've done this together, we have discovered that there are 4 spirits in our home. Bob is the calmest one. When I mentioned that we spoke to a spirit named Bob in the house, my fiancé's cousin mentioned that Bob is her grandfather who passed. His name is actually Robert, but everyone just called him Bob. Mind you, we share the house with her cousin and uncle. Knowing that Bob isn't a threat, I've gotten the other names of the 3 spirits left. Those being Toby, Eric, and Melissa. The female spirit, I can't say for sure if that's her name. Anytime I've tried to reassure the name, I don't get a response. And whenever I'm about to, it's like something is stopping her. She does indeed like to laugh, as she has done so 3 times in the last 2 days. Anytime I hear from her, she's giving a yes or no answer with occasional other sentences. Toby is, from what I understand, a good spirit, although I've seen him as a dark shadow next to our bathroom, and this was earlier today while I was home alone, with most of the lights out. The main part of this story that I'm getting into now is Eric. So upon using the spirit box, about 20 minutes ago before the post, I had asked multiple questions, but I'm going to get into the more interesting ones. One of the questions I asked after I got his name was if he was a good or an evil spirit. I got no response, and then I asked if he was a good spirit. I get a response this time, and he says yes, very clearly. Since I know that demons can lie and try to trick you of what they really are, I decided to ask if he was lying to me. He responded once more by saying, yeah. I was then able to confirm that he is the one spirit who is demonic. Things started making sense at this point, as clearly today, when I was home alone, when my spirit box was on, I noticed our kitchen chair was knocked over, and I took a picture of it and sent it to my fiancée to show her. It also explained why I always felt uncomfortable and watched in our garage that we rarely enter now. I had asked him about both of these things, even trying to make sure that he wasn't the shadow figure in the hallway leading to our room. He told me that he wasn't, which led me to assume it was Toby. He did reply to me that the garage is where he hides at. Most of the talk that I had with him after was him saying, come, the female spirit as well was trying to convince me to go into our garage. At the time, though it didn't cross my mind that they were mentioning it, I was trying to ask where they want me to go. I didn't get any straightforward response about the question. I was told leave me alone or go on multiple occasions today and tonight. Upon ending my spirit box session, I went to the kitchen to grab something to eat. I ended up feeling some weird sensation on the left side of my collarbone, almost like something had touched me or dug into my skin softly. I went to the restroom to comb my hair and checked my neck and person for any kind of marks. I ended up noticing that there was a fingerprint on my collarbone. It almost looked the size of a young male's hand, or maybe a little older. I wanted to capture a picture, but when I went to do so, the marking was gone. All I know now is that there is something evil here, and there are more spirits than me or my fiancé thought. Last night, my boyfriend went into the room next to our bedroom to play video games while I watched Parks and Rec on my phone on low volume in bed. After an hour or so, he ran in and asked, "Is everything okay?" I stared blankly at him. "Yeah? Why?" He then said he'd heard someone wailing, loudly, and that it sounded like my voice. It couldn't have been Parks and Rec, because I wasn't watching an episode with any sound in it like that, not to mention that the volume was too low to be heard in the other room. It couldn't have been me because I was just chilling. Additionally, I had not heard any wailing sound at all. He said he'd heard it through his gaming headphones a couple of times, wasn't quite sure what it was, took them off, heard it a third time clearly, and then came to check on me. This is strange because a few nights before, I was feeling incredibly ill with severe chills to the point where I couldn't leave the blankets to get more blankets. I was calling for help, and he heard nothing through his headphones. They're pretty good at canceling outside noise, plus he plays the game music at high volume. So who was the wailing woman? For a little background, my mother has been in a long-term nursing facility since March, with some serious but stable health issues. Then there was a virus outbreak in her facility, and she was diagnosed with it. I of course worried for her condition as she began to decline rather quickly over the beginning of last week. Last Wednesday, I switched off my light at 10 p.m. like most nights, rolled over, and began to doze off. Typically when I'm dozing, my mind will follow some random train of thought that will lead me off into snooze land. That night, as I was dozing, I envisioned my mother walking into my late father's arms, being hugged by my older brother who had died 9 years ago, and having my grandparents and aunt gather around her while being hugged by my father. Then the phone woke me up at 10:30 p.m. The hospice nurse called to tell me that my mother had passed away at 10:15. I like to think that I was seeing her entry into heaven, with my family's love and long-missed affection return to bring her to happiness. I bought an old antique Asian chest about 15 years ago. It was really lovely. I moved in with my parents while I was in college into the guest house out back. There was no room in the tiny cottage for the chest, so my mom had me put it in the walkway between the back of the house where my young brothers slept and the living room. Everyone, and I mean everyone, hated that piece of furniture. They'd scurry past it as fast as they could to get wherever they were going. Occasionally we would hear knocking or a random door that would just open. One morning my brother Justin and I left and went to run errands and go shopping. When we came back 6 hours later, my mom was raking leaves in the front yard. When we got out of the car, Mom asked, "Wait, when did you come get Justin?" We told her that we had been gone all day. She said, "No, you haven't. I just saw him 2 hours ago. I assumed he'd gone to his bedroom to play video games." I told her that we had been gone since early that morning, and she kept insisting that there was no way. He walked past her. She had said hi to him. She said that he didn't respond to her, but she figured that he had been on a mission to get to his room. When I asked her where she saw him, she said that she was vacuuming in the hallway in front of the chest. I ended up giving it to my older brother, who said that he would hear my nieces laughing and playing in the hallway of his apartment. He said one morning he got up to see the youngest run down the hall into her room, but when he got to her room, she wasn't in there. He threw it out. I wish he hadn't, and I wish that I knew where it was now. So about 15 years ago, I was living with my ex-girlfriend, my sister, and her husband in an old house not far from town. Within the first few weeks of living there, strange things were happening regularly. Lights going out randomly, noises upstairs. At one point, one of the windows at the back of the house was cut. Like someone had went in with glass cutters trying to break in, but gave up on it and left. Creepy stuff like that. That was bad enough, but things got pretty severe as time went on. One week in particular was truly insane. The first thing that happened that week was on a Tuesday night. Everyone was working, and I was home alone watching TV when I noticed that our cat was acting really weird, backed into a corner, and arched up as though she was scared. When I went to get up, the electricity went out in the house, and it was pitch black inside. The second that happened, I heard really loud footsteps running down the stairs toward me. I got up and braced myself for whatever it was, but there was nothing. I gathered myself and went outside to the front garden to check if the other houses' lights were on, but my house was the only one that was dark. I went to the fuse box to reset the trip switch, and all was back to normal. A few days later, I think it was a Tuesday, we were all sitting in the living room watching a movie and eating a pizza. The lights were on, there was a good atmosphere in the house, when out of nowhere, a massive bang happened upstairs. We go up to check it out, and I went into our bedroom and saw that my bedside table was in the middle of the room. But the worst and last thing that happened to me was on a Saturday night. I'll never forget this. It still gives me chills when I think about it. We go to bed, everything's normal. We watch a bit of a movie and fall asleep.
I wake up facing the wall and glance at the alarm clock. It reads 3:13 a.m. I turned over to go back to sleep and saw my ex standing in the center of the room. Confused, I begin to sit up and ask her what's wrong. But as I start to sit up, I realize my ex is asleep in bed next to me. A surge of fear runs through my core, and I'm frozen to the spot. My eyes adjust, and I just barely make out the figure. It was a young girl in a nightdress with a cartoon character on it, soaking wet, with her head looking down at the floor. I could hear the water droplets landing on the carpet, and I'm just sitting there totally in shock, unable to believe my eyes. After a couple of seconds, her apparition melted away and faded out of sight. I got up and turned on the lights and tried to tell myself that it was just a night terror or something, but the problem with that was that there was a wet patch where she had been standing. We moved out shortly after that, but I can still picture her to this day. Creepiest thing I've ever experienced. When I was young, my family was digging up the backyard about 1 meter deep, and I found an old, rusty skeleton key. Me being a kid, I thought it was the coolest thing ever. It became my favorite toy. Most days I'd play with my Legos, Action Mans, and now my new key in my room. And this is when it started happening. I would have my bedroom door closed, and it would suddenly just open by itself and swing wide, slowly. This went on for months, and I didn't think anything about it really until I asked my mom why she kept opening my door, and she said that she hadn't. So the next time I was playing, I watched the door as it opened and yelled at it to go away. The door slammed shut, and my mom came running from the other side of the house to see what was going on. Fast forward to now, and I've started being able to see them. You know how you look at a light, and you get those wriggly things and spots in your eye? They appear like that, like an implant on my mind, except when you look around, they don't stay on that position on your eye. They stay on that position in space. I've gotten to the point where I don't need to verbally say anything to get rid of them. I just think about a way of getting rid of them, and they disintegrate or disappear. There are some, though, that are more powerful than others and take more effort. I just got finished getting rid of one at my girlfriend's house, and it was probably the hardest one yet. I had to picture the sun swallowing it whole, and watched as a miniature sun appeared in the room next to it and swallowed it as it was screaming. I've never heard sounds from them before, which is part of the reason I'm writing this. I've never told anyone about this. I don't think I'm crazy. I have a pretty normal life. I've never had any mental illnesses, and there's no history of any in my family. I'm wondering if there's anyone else out there seeing these things the same way I do. I work night shift on a unit at a nursing home. I hear and see a lot of weird things, but nothing much with meaning. Me and the other aide were walking down my hall to go check on a fall risk resident when we got in front of the door to an empty room that stays locked. The resident had moved home and no one had been in there since mid-October. I heard 3 distinct knocks coming from inside the room on the door as soon as we walked by. I froze and turned around, and without speaking looked at my friend, waiting for her to say if she had heard it as well, and when she did, I was frozen in fear, knowing that I was not alone in hearing things. Lots of little extra things have also happened. Me and another aide walked by a room when we got bad vibes. It was cracked open an inch, and the door slammed shut suddenly, so hard that it shook the floor. Right next to the room with the knocks, we had a resident pass away. Again, me and an aide walked by. The door was closed and locked.
and the handle started jiggling hard and fast. Another time, me and Undead heard snarling growls coming from the dining room all night. The same night when the knocks occurred. There were also instances of running faucets in the residents' bathrooms, in the basement, anywhere that I went had a resident complaining of water running all night. So this happened a few months back, when I happened to be in the bathroom. I was singing that Willow Smith "Wait a Minute" song to myself, minding my business, you know. I got to the point in the song where she quotes a phrase said in the Avatar movie in their language. And while I'm singing it, I'm thinking to myself at the same time, I wonder what that actually means translated into English. And as I finished singing the line, simultaneously trying to recall what it translated to, a female, disembodied voice said, "No, you can't." I shut up immediately and paused for a second, shocked. It sounded as if someone were speaking into a tin can, but very clear and only a few feet away. I left the bathroom completely weirded out, and after a few minutes I remembered about wanting to know what the phrase meant. I googled it and found out that it meant "I see you" in English. I was, and am, still blown away by this strange experience. I live on the East Coast, so the cemeteries are ancient, mostly from the 1700s. Me and a group of friends went to a local cemetery and decided to do some light, no equipment, just our phone flashlights, ghost hunting. Nothing too eventful happened for the first half hour as we walked around the soldier memorials. We crossed an old limestone bridge with a little creek underneath. As we started to leave the memorials, I said goodbye, and people started to feel dizzy or weak in the knees with pressure in the back of their heads and upper neck. A few even felt really tired afterward. We went on a little further, and a couple of the group members decided to split off, so me and two others were going to the oldest section of the cemetery. A girl kept hearing her name, and kept going ahead of us. After we all regrouped and talked over everything that had happened, the other guy in the group pulled his necklace off to give it to his girlfriend and found out that it was spinning without his hand or arm moving. I personally held his arm and felt his hand. It was not moving. It spun for about a minute, then started making an X shape, and then slowly died out. After that, nothing else happened to me or my group. However, the couple said that they were hearing people calling to them from the woods, into an area without roads or any buildings for miles. Needless to say, they thought that we were playing with them, but we were on opposite sides of the cemetery entirely. Just yesterday I was talking to a girl from the group, and she said that at home she heard the same voices, plus screaming and people knocking on her door. Today, I found out that she's in jail. What do I do? Should we go back to the cemetery and apologize? Or should we just forget that it happened? I'm not saying we have a ghost, spook, or spirit, but something phenomenological is definitely happening in our home. The brief background on the home is that it's over 70 years old in an older part of our town. The previous resident was a well-respected attorney in the area, and he died here. We wouldn't learn this until after we moved in. The house was almost completely dismantled and rebuilt with new everything. Paint, electric, plumbing, drywall, etc. One floor, Not a whole lot of square footage. An attic that has about 2.5 feet of clearance. Not long after getting moved in, my wife and I learned a little bit more about the house's history, and that the previous owner had passed away, and that it was quite some time after his death before he was discovered. We made peace with this information, and continued settling in. The first peculiar incident wasn't really that peculiar. It had been well over a year since the previous owner passed, but he kept receiving mail. A lot of mail. Fun mail, too. Magazines and newspapers with the subscriptions renewing. We remarked on the mail as being merely interesting, and for the sake of creating a tradition, we always kept the old attorney's mail for a day or two, in case he just wanted to read it. Eventually, this would trickle to a stop. The second peculiar incident caught our attention. After 2 months of being in the house, we decided to get newer, better locks for the doors. I had a new key, my wife had a new key. 2 extra keys went on the key hook. A few days go by, and my wife asked me if I had lost my key or if I had trouble locking or unlocking the door. I hadn't. She showed me the 2 extra keys. Both were still on the wire ring, and both had bends of about 15 degrees right at the key shoulder. We agreed that this was odd, but we let it go with some loose rationalizations. The third peculiar incident started a little over 2 years ago, and continues still. Neither I nor my wife smoke. However, about once every 2 weeks on a random day, and usually after midnight, the distinct odor of warm cigarette smoke can be smelled in our living room. At first, we thought it was someone walking nearby, or a neighbor, or an odd or unfortunate combination of smells from a garbage can. We got some cameras, and pointed them outside to see what we could see. Nothing. The last time we smelled cigarettes was about 2 weeks ago. And we've had electricians check our wiring on unrelated matters just in case. The fourth incident relates to the second. 2 metal spoons in the silverware drawer were bent. Almost snapped. Aside from the cigarette smoke, it's been a while since anything has happened, until last week. For whatever reason, the attorney's mail is resumed and the 5th peculiar incident has occurred. I work out in the woods, and my wife now works from home in the company of our 2 cats. In a flurry of texts and phone calls, she told me that it sounded like someone was running around upstairs, as if they were rushing across the house to answer the phone, was how she described it. We've had squirrels in our useless attic and the occasional tree branch. The footsteps exceeded both of those. The 6th and most recent peculiar incident is equal parts mundane and intriguing. We have a favorite spatula. Yes, we do. Some of you reading this probably have your own favorite spatula, spoon, fork, pot, pan as well. We used the bright robin's egg blue utensil to make our Thanksgiving dinner and set it aside with the rest of the cooking detritus. That evening, and the following morning, the kitchen is cleaned and everything is put away. Sunday began the greater holiday baking season, requiring the favorite spatula. Except, it was missing. The ceramic container where the utensils are stored has everything else. Red things, green things, metal things, wooden things. Visual inspection of the surrounding area results in zilch. Every cupboard and drawer opened and investigated to nothing. We sadly conclude that after the big cleanup, it must have ended up in the trash. So we began an online hunt for its replacement. On Friday last, I get a picture of the utensils sitting quite happily amongst all the others. I was confused by this, since the evening before we had to use other tools instead of the missing spatula because it was missing. So, sometime after 9:30 p.m. Thursday and 7:18 a.m. on Friday, something that was missing for at least 5 days returned. So, here it is in order. 1. A confluence of strange coincidences. 2. Sleepwalking. 3. Someone is managing to live in our attic. 4. That I and my wife are in a weirdly mutual prank cycle. Or 5. Something real is happening. If you have any ideas, tests, solutions, resources, or suggestions, I'm listening. Nothing seems malvoyant about what's been happening, but it's definitely happening. It was 1999, and I worked night shift in a factory back in Puerto Rico. One night it was just QC and me working in a back dark room of the factory. About 2:30 a.m. I saw a door open, and a pale young lady stepped in and walked in our direction. QC was facing the other way, and I was looking at her from my workstation. I stood up, and that's when I noticed that from the waist down, the woman was blurred. She was dressed in a light blue dress and a cap. As she got closer, she vanished into a mist. I rubbed my eyes and called the QC. I told her what I had just seen, and she said, "It's just your imagination playing tricks." After an hour or so had passed, this tall, dark shape, dressed in a brown mechanic's outfit, got close to me, looking over my right shoulder. I could see it with the edge of my eyes. It wasn't touching the floor. I froze, petrified. For about 30 minutes, it kept moving forward and backward. I finished the work night and went home spooked. Next day, I told my experience to everyone, and a mechanic who had worked there for years told me that when he stayed there, an old mechanic who had all kinds of issues was found hung in the same spot where I was working. I bought 3 small clown statues several years ago from a thrift store. They came in a box of about 100 other handmade clowns, and I picked out the cutest ones. Last year I moved into a new house and put the 3 clowns in a large display case in my living room along with the other trinkets. The case is completely inaccessible to the elements and is sealed by 2 panes of sliding glass. I got a horrible wave of fear one night a few months ago, and for no apparent reason my first instinct was to check the display case. To my shock, I noticed that one of the clowns had turned 180 degrees around in the case and had positioned itself to look away from the living room. The glass had remained shut, and nothing else was out of the ordinary. I turned it back to face the right way and forgot about it until I felt the same wave of fear about a month later. Once again I checked the case, and the same clown was turned the same 180 degrees around again. This has happened about 5 times now, and I'm starting to get really worried. I can't help but believe that it's a dark spirit or energy. I'm so freaked out. It's like the clown is trying to reach me, make me notice it, or perhaps get closer to the other objects in the case. I'm afraid to destroy it, move it, or touch it at all, because I don't want to absorb any energy or curse that it might contain. From as early as I can remember, I used to fall asleep watching old, reel-to-reel black and white cartoons on my wall, like Steamboat Willie. I clearly remember the jittery, shutter-like quality of the cartoon from the old reel-to-reel projector. There was no actual movie projector in my room. At night, I would wake up to someone tapping me on the shoulder. I had a usual routine that I followed when it happened, which involved burying myself under my covers and telling myself that I would count to 7 and then turn over to see what was there. Not sure if there's a significance to 7. To this day, I like to end things with 7. For example, I set my alarm at 6:27 and not 6:30. But anyhow, I would go through the counting routine multiple times. I wanted to see what was there, but I was a kid and didn't really want to see what was there. My mom would tell me that I just needed to confront it and tell it to leave me alone. It took years to build up that courage. I don't remember exactly how long, but I must have been in my early teens before I actually did get the nerve up to turn over right away and tell it to leave me alone and stop tapping me on the shoulder. Once I confronted it, it did stop. Then comes my baby sister when I was 15. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night quite often. Once she was old enough to talk, she said that she was scared of the hand that came up between her wall and the bed and tapped her on the shoulder at night. A few years ago, I was still in high school, and out of my own curiosity, I tried to lucid dream. I started recording dreams for a month as soon as I woke up. I had all of them written out on a big notepad, but I never really got it to work. Anyway, one night I had a dream where a friend came to me right before I woke up, and the only thing that happened was him telling me something bad is gonna happen soon. A few days later, I completely forgot about this, but the same friend in real life keeps acting really just down in the dumps. I asked him what's wrong, and he said it's just a bummer because his uncle had a heart attack and he's worried about him. To add to it, I get a call later that day telling me that my uncle also had a heart attack on the same day and died. At that point, I had to break this weird story to him. Premonition? Or just pretty creepy coincidence? He believes the story, even though I would have been skeptical. We used to have a chair sitting in my parents' closet. It was one of those old straw ones that felt like it was going to fall apart every time you sat on it. My sister was born first, and almost every night she would stand in her crib pointing at the wall. At first, my parents had no idea what was going on, until they found out the direction she was pointing was where my parents' closet was, with the chair. The same thing happened over and over until I was born 4 years later. I got the room that my sister had been in. I was 1, and when my parents saw me one night, I was doing the exact same thing, pointing at the same spot that my sister had. Time went on, and nothing happened concerning the chair. One day my parents went into their closet and found written in crayon the name Sue. My parents have never seen this before. After that, nothing else happened. The chair started to take up space, so my mom decided to take it to the place where she used to work. Our good friend had that class now, and it was all hers. It was a 5th grade science class. After about a month, my mom got a text that Sue was doing things. She said that Sue was dumping stuff off of shelves and throwing things. She said that Sue took a liking to one of her kids and messed with his hair and threw stuff directly at him. That was the last time we ever heard anything about Sue. I would definitely like to go back to see if she's still there. So it was around May of this year when I was playing hide and seek with my family. When the game started, I went to the basement. But after a couple minutes, I was about to be spotted, so I moved to the bathroom, but went backwards into the bathroom. Keep in mind, I was facing the doorway, and that is when it started. When I heard the groans, I froze. They didn't sound human, so I knew it wasn't one of my family members. A couple of minutes went by, and I could still hear the groans, but built up the courage to run out of the bathroom. A couple of more minutes went by. I could still hear the groans, and I had to build up the courage to run from the bathroom. That's all I have to share. If you could explain what happened, then that would be great. My great-grandmother died in that house. It was built in the 1940s, and that basement bathroom was built very poorly. Many years ago, I visited a secret bunker in England that had been turned into a museum. The only thing I knew about it beforehand was that it had been built during the Second World War. The atmosphere inside was kinda creepy because it was underground and very quiet, and there were mannequins dotted about the place, but that didn't really bother me. What creeped me out the most was a feeling of being watched and followed by someone or something that I couldn't see. During one part of the tour, I was leaving one of the rooms when a desk lamp suddenly turned itself off. I was the only person in the room at the time, and the lamp was behind glass, so nobody could get to it to switch it off. When I got home, I did some research on the bunker and found out that TV's Most Haunted had done an investigation there once, and they felt exactly the same feelings of being watched and followed as I had. I'm a bit skeptical about ghosts, so I can't say for certain if my experience was paranormal or not, but it was certainly quite interesting. My mom and grandma have had similar experiences with premonitions, but I am now 21 and have been having them for the first time in my own life recently. A few weeks ago, I had a very vivid dream about my childhood best friend who I haven't seen or spoken to in years, and I woke up the next day to find out that she had committed suicide. Then this past week, I told my boyfriend that I missed our old coworker, who we also haven't seen or spoken to in a few years. And come to find out, he suddenly dropped dead about 15 minutes before I had made that comment. Today I took a nap and had another very vivid dream, very lucid, about my high school boyfriend. And now I'm a little bit freaked out, and I'll definitely be watching his social media over the coming days, hoping that this has just been a weird coincidence. My dad and I decided to go to this store one day to buy incense, and we meet this woman that I think owns the shop, and she's weirdly interested in the color of my eyes. My eyes are a weird color, they're yellow and green, but she was telling me that they're so bright that they're deceiving. Well, fast forward to a few weeks later, and I'm in my room asleep. My mom is awake, and when I woke up, she told me that she saw a woman, perfectly described her as the woman from that shop, astral projecting into our house, and went in my room and tried to take me. My mom had never went to that store, had never seen that woman, so that's how I know she wasn't lying. My mom and dad weren't on talking terms at that time. But ever since then, I get really weird nightmares involving her in them, and they occur every night, and I can't get them to stop. They always involve her taking me.